It all kicked off in a city right near the vampire village of Akroe, where a hooded guy in black strode down the street, brushing past a crowd of homeless people. As he neared the tavern, loud voices warned him about that cursed place, where someone barely survives each day, and then the man snapped, "No traveler steps in, no matter what you try." He shoved the two doors apart and stepped inside, but he didn't stop. He kept listening in, while the second man snapped that things weren't just bad here, because nasty rumors were slithering all over the entire region. Turns out the rumors were about a vampire village right next door, and the bartender was already panicking, saying he'd be wiped out for good. Then the newcomer shoved his way in and snapped at the worker. The cloaked man demanded he be excused, then leaned in and grilled him about how to reach the vampire village. So the bartender got a spark in his eyes, asked if the kid was a hunter, and the young man just shook his head. Soon the young man, turning out to be a necromancer, finally broke through to the village of Jamond, a place everyone swore was crawling with vampires. At first it was a special assignment. Nina, the registrar, handed it to him and told him to go probe that dark place. The guy asked, "If they're asking me to investigate, do these monsters really live here?" And the girl snapped back, "No, the village is abandoned. The undead just moved in and turned it into their base." She also said some folks swear the village is still out there, and that they're gearing up to hit people, so everyone has to stay ready and go track down the vampire that's supposedly living there. The guy swore he understood everything. Then the girl pushed for a few more questions, and Nina straight up demanded to know why his power flipped from a tame fighter into a necromancer. He still had a burning reason to push forward. He was convinced this place could finally reveal why he ended up as a necromancer, and that it was the next crucial step toward cracking the whole mystery. Still stuck in his own thoughts, replaying that guild conversation, he suddenly went on high alert. Then two huge monsters slammed into view and started howling at the moon. Two beast spirits stood there, Ace the Minotaur spirit and Ray the one-horned wolf spirit, and the young necromancer wasted no time, snapping a command as his summoned powers forced them to growl like thunder. The boy snapped his head up and asked the two spirits straight out if they could feel anything at all. Then he stressed they could sense other undead, even if their answers were weirdly hard for him to read. Randall still couldn't make out some of their roars because he'd once trained them, but then his own power shifted and he finally started chasing her clue. A bunch of dead-looking people with human bodies spilled out of one building like they'd been released, and their gate screamed, "Local undead." Then they surged straight at the guy. Randall screamed, spat curses, and bolted for his life. Then his two spirits surged forward like guards at full attack, rushing to protect their master as he got thrown into trouble. Ace and Ray, absolutely lethal embodiments of those creatures, tore through the dead people charging at them before they could even land a hit. Minutes dragged by and then finally the threat fizzled out. The undead corpses were piled and huddled near the ruins, and Randall just stood there, trying to force air back into his lungs. The boy stared at that raw power, stunned, then stepped closer and admitted it made him feel uneasy. Right after that, Randall crossed his arms and said he'd pray for them. The boy reckoned he could crack necromancy for real, yanked out the book, and started hunting through the skills. Boom, he'd unlocked bone smoothing, novice sword, novice mastery, and abnormal resistance. Randall gasped in disbelief. He didn't do anything but clasp his hands together, and thanks to those newly earned skills, reinforcement, and shape recovery, it somehow all clicked into place. Randall figured, if that's real, I've got to test it, and the boy slapped his hand on the book, then unleashed another power he'd once had back when he was still a tamer. The kid hurled a massive contract spell, praying it would crush his foes and pull everyone hiding in the Rillans right out into the open. A blinding, glowing field surged across the abandoned village, lighting every ruin up, yet the boy stared, waiting, nothing moved. So he clenched his focus and went right back to studying the book. The boy blinked in shock when the book slid him an extended range of necromancy. Right after it revealed, he'd finally mastered the necromancer's skill and unlocked a batch of brand new spells. Among them were regeneration, brutal physical resistance, blood recovery, razor flexibility, and ruthless pain tolerance, plus a whole lot more. And his stats skyrocketed after he swallowed skills straight from the undead roaming his area. Randall couldn't believe he could pull off something that huge with just simple actions, and right there, he was relieved as he finally grabbed the skill table from the guild. Ray and Ace got their status updated too, and that guy had just snagged yet another necromancy skill, like extra white flame, while Randall stared at it like it was all real magic in his notes, swearing the last skills must be connected, then remembering white flame and illumination are only for sages, because he couldn't stop himself from admiring the insane new power. The guy finally got it. Simplification is one thing, but necromancy is a whole different monster. With taming, you don't just end it, you keep working with the creature and you're still partners long after you've subdued it. Necromantic just yanks abilities right out of its victim, no warning, no hesitation, and the opponent vanishes instantly, so if someone grabs for it, all they get is the power, and then the person is gone. If you play your cards right, you might be able to wipe out the vampires without even touching the sacred magic Randall has already prepared. Right behind the necromancer, someone appeared out of nowhere. He caught the footsteps, whipped around instantly, and there stood a blonde girl, walking straight toward him as she blurted that she'd just been woken up. He didn't just wreck her sleep, he also wiped out the girl's familiars, and when she demanded to know if it was him, Randall went pale the moment he got a clear look at her wings. Then she burst into laughter, like that answer was exactly what she wanted. She kept laughing, then slowly lifted her hand, aimed right at his, and declared that this would make up for everything he'd done to her subjects. The vampire flicked her finger upward, and the arm she'd been pointing at ripped clean off its body, blasting sideways in an instant. In the blink of an eye, it was gone so fast that Randall didn't even get a chance to react. Even after he hit the ground, that hellish agony wouldn't quit, ringing in his ears. Randall still heard the vampire cackle, but the pain-tolerant skill he'd just picked up was what kept him from completely breaking. Guarding his master, the one-horned wolf Ray burst at the girl, snarling like a warning, leapt sky-high, and snapped his toothy mouth wide open. The blonde girl spun around, locked eyes with the spirit boy, gave a soft smile, and asked the wolf, "So you really want to play nice with me, huh?" Randall howled at his beast, screaming for it to halt and hold, while the boy blasted out that this girl wasn't someone the wolf could beat, because the spirit was unstoppable. The girl rocketed upward, tapped the wolf's neck, and swung onto his back, then slammed him down with a brutal shove, shouting at the dog to sit as he hit the ground. Racing right after the first spirit, the second one, Minotaur Ace, charged ahead without a single delay, towering and brutally strong as the ground thumped and shook under his feet. The girl only sighed and muttered, like it was just another day of being popular. The vampire held her breath until the bull charged in, then snapped her fingers with a swift flick, whoosh, sending his spirit flying back a few meters and slamming him into the building. The guy stared in horror, and in a low voice he admitted the girl was too strong. There was no way he could beat her. The moment the vampire heard it, she slid in behind him. The girl heard Randall sing her praises, and the vampire purred that she was thrilled. Then she clocked the boy and launched him flying clear out past the Minotaur. Randall lay crumpled on the floor, having smashed straight through an entire wall of the house behind him. The guy didn't feel a thing, but blood was pouring out, and this pace was going to finish him. Right then, the girl showed up beside him and started talking. She stared straight into the boy's eyes and declared the games were done. Then her sinister laughter tore through the air, sharp fangs flashing out from beneath her lips. Randall wasn't about to fold that easy. He cracked out one of the necromancer spells he'd just gotten, thrust his hand forward, roared, and unleashed white flame asterisk asterisk. The spell came ripping through, smashing everything in its path and blasting a flash of light. Then, right in front of him, he spotted a winged girl's silhouette, striding straight toward him. The girl stepped in, grinned, and said this was apparently all Randall could manage. Then the guy snapped to the truth. The white flame didn't do a thing because there wasn't a single scratch on her. Randall kept his grip on the spot where his right hand used to be, and the creep grinned back, saying not to sweat, because she still had something left for her. Randall hoisted his last arm skyward from that little platform and bellowed the next hacking spell. Then a brutal lightning bolt tore down, ready to obliterate whatever stood in its way. The vampire snapped her head up in shock. There was no way the strike should have come from there, and the lightning was blazing too fast for her to even react or flee. The spell landed in the very spot where the girl had been standing just seconds ago. Then the blast wave ripped the dust from the ruined houses and flung it aside, but Randall refused to fall. With the explosion roaring behind them, a blast of wind surged harder and harder, and the guy had to hunch low to keep from getting swept away, so Randall stretched out his hand and started steadying himself, slowing his body down before the current could take him. A full moon glared down as the clouds finally began to thin. Randall panted like hell after burning through every last ounce of energy, lifting his head and locking eyes forward, desperate to read what his attack had done. Randall knew deep down that if this failed, the boy would be done for, no chance left against that creature, and then he heard it, the heel of a shoe clicking back into the air. The guy slumped against the wall, groaning one more heavy sigh like it was over, until the girl walked up and started talking, and the vampire smirked, claiming his one-of-a-kind skills, right when her interest finally sparked. Then out of nowhere, something Randall never saw coming hit him. She flashed a smile, pressed a hand to her chest, and basically invited the guy to join her vampire family. Randall snapped his head up, eyes and mouth popping open in shock, and the guy tried to ask again, still drowning in confusion, like he couldn't even wrap his head around what kind of family that was. The girl flashed a smile and shot her hand up. "You've got it all right," she said, then declared she was a pureblood vampire lord, and that meant she could finally welcome him into her family. Randall stayed planted, slumped against the wall, while the guy clutched his wound. Then the girl paused, looked him in the eye, and asked what he thought of it, and honestly, she said the whole opportunity was nothing short of amazing. Randall knew he had almost zero chance to win, so he figured it was better to bend than get slaughtered. Then he blurted out that the only way to join the family was to drink the girl's blood. The girl said that it was, and Randall shot back, asking what would happen to him after all this, only for the vampire to lift her head, scratch her chin, and mutter that she had to think, because she couldn't shake the feeling the guy really understood himself. Randall locked eyes with the vampire lord, totally baffled as the whole mess spiraled into something absurd. Then the girl burst into screams, swearing it was her first time and begging him to forgive her. Randall stared, totally thrown off, waiting for some kind of answer. Then the vampire wheezed, turned toward him, and demanded to know if he was going to act or not. Randall figured that even if she was a vampire lord, she had to be pretty young by his standards. Then he smirked, leaned in, and asked her name. Murren's face lit up in a huge smile. She couldn't believe someone would ask that. Then she shot to her feet, stood proud as ever, and declared, "I'm Murren, and I'm a pureblood vampire lord." Randall didn't rush his answer. He spun toward Murren and told her he had a counter-proposal for the girl. Murren just stared, then demanded, "What are you talking about?" Randall started closing in on her, and the girl flashed a bright smile, said she was finally in a good mood now, so she'd listen to every word he had. Suddenly, Randall's body started going through brutal changes, and the young man snapped his attention back to his own hand, now coated in grimy, dark soot that crawled over his skin and itched like pure misery. The hand hovering near Murren snapped forward and zipped to where it was supposed to be, and Randall just stared in stunned disbelief. He slowly started to wiggle his fingers, and then it hit him. His hand was back to normal, fully working like before. Myron smiled and told him she'd healed it with the skill of the Lord of the Night. He knew he was signing up for disaster if she was one of those vampires who chained humans up, but she'd already healed his arm, so he convinced himself she wouldn't go after him. Out of nowhere, the guy flashed a smile, gently squeezed his now-healed hand, and launched his offer. Randall leaned in and asked the girl to be his comrade. At that moment, his words meant nothing to her. Murren snapped her arms across her chest and pressed him again, demanding to know what it even meant to be a comrade for someone. The girl clasped her hands close and started to casually spill her doubts, and Randall figured she didn't want this at all, only for her to snap back that the real reason was something else entirely. Randall didn't get what she meant at first, so he asked if he was the one she was terrified of, Myron. The girl shook her head, fear and panic flashing across her face, and then the vampire admitted the truth. She wasn't afraid of one person, she was afraid of people. She started telling him that vampires and humans just don't mix, and she'd learned that the hard way. Then she added this gut punch. Even vampires who never interfered with human lives were still stuck in chains, enslaved. She kept going, saying every vampire she'd met wasn't preying on anyone, so she didn't hate them, but she absolutely knew how ruthless humans could be. Right after the girl wrapped up her story, they heard that same crunch, debris shifting under a small weight, and it was Ray who bolted over to the owner to check. The girl just shook her head and said she had nothing else to add. Myron said if it were one of my family, I'd stay way calmer, because family isn't something to fear, they're your people, subordinates, comrades, friends, even your children. Randall cut her off and declared, I'm a necromancer, that's why I can summon immortal demons and bind the undead to me as my friends. Randall shot to his feet, brushing dust from his coat, stared her straight in the eye, and offered his hand with a grin, promising he'd become part of her family. Then he leaned in and said she'd have to sign a necromancer contract with him, because once the ink hit, they'd be equals, and Murren just smiled, chuckling like it all made perfect sense. Murren's smile lit up as she said, all right, if he's that stubborn, I won't be able to stop him, and then she nodded, ready to become his comrade. Right as the girl finished talking, the guy casually said, I'm Randall. She didn't get it at first, then her face lit up, she burst into wide laughter, and she reached out, praising his beautiful name with a bright grin. With everyone huddled into a tight little circle, just Randall, Myron, and the two spirits, Myron spoke up in a low voice and told them to lock in the next move. Suddenly, Randall snapped with what he swore was a brilliant idea. He grinned at Murren and told her that, if she didn't mind, she could join him as an adventurer. Murren shot upright in an instant, and a bright spark lit up her eyes as she leaned in toward the guy, then said, that sounds amazing. The girl couldn't help but get curious, peppering him with, so what happens when we sign that necromancer contract Randall talked about, and he just shrugged, admitting he had no clue. Murren fumed and demanded, wait, was that really your first time? Randall burst into laughter, fired back the girl's words, then apologized and swore it was their very first time, both of them. Then the girl flashed a smile and admitted she'd totally forgotten to mention one tiny detail. Murren said joining the family would have to be delayed for now. When Randall demanded answers, Murren snapped back that once a family contract was sealed, the boy couldn't tear it apart anymore. Breaking it meant death, so they needed to start with something simple. Randall glanced away and admitted he got it, and the boy agreed too. Sure, there was a real risk of getting tied down by these family bonds, but he figured he could keep it safe with a contract signed on his end. Right, wrong. Because then the boy decided the only thing that mattered most was keeping Randall close to that lonely vampire, while the girl sweetly teased at his spirit like it was hers to play with. Then bam, this whole new crew of non-humans showed up out of nowhere, and Randall immediately shot to his feet, shouting that it was time to haul them back to the guild and get the girl registered as an adventurer. But Randall had to hear one crucial detail, because the guy warned that the guild would be packed, and the girl only grinned, saying it was perfect since Randall was going with her. Randall smiled back on the spot, and that confession lit up everything. He knew she trusted him, so yeah, it was officially time to kick off their brand new adventure. So Randall and Myron teamed up, and they slipped toward the guild on foot after dark. Randall pulled a hood over himself and insisted the wind was getting nastier by the minute. Suddenly, the boy snapped his head toward her and warned that the cold was rolling in and they could barely see. Then he pointed at the building and said they should duck into the tavern for a rest. Murren nodded right away. The boys slipped inside and Randall rushed off to talk to the homeowner. Then the man returned and led them into a room where they could finally drop their bags. Once they were alone, Randall flashed an awkward smile and admitted they only had one free room, so he should probably apologize. Myron cut in right away, saying there was no reason to grab 2 rooms since there was plenty of space. The girl whirled around and demanded where Randall's creatures, Ray and Ace, had vanished to, and the guy just lifted a small bottle and admitted he'd snatched one of them with Coffin of the Dead's power. The girl nodded like she got it, then told Randall they hadn't forged a necromancer contract yet, so Randall started packing and admitted, yeah, that's true. Murren leaned in, grinning, and asked if they could do it right now, and Randall lit up and agreed on the spot. He dug through his stuff, snatched up that exact skill book, and flipped it open to study the instructions he'd need to finish the contract for his class. He finally found the right page, froze there for a breathless moment, devoured the words, then said, "I'm ready," and the young man shot out his hand and started reading the spell. As the necromancer uttered his words, a tiny magical vortex ripped open in the room and swallowed Murren and Randall's bodies whole. Randall snapped his speech shut and shut his eyes tight. Then the room went dead silent, and the boy realized the book was mirroring the final piece of Randall's contract with the vampire lord Myron. The magical vortex vanished and Randall snapped, saying the contract was finally ready. Then the girl stared at her own body, stunned, mumbling that she couldn't explain the strange sensation she'd just felt. I stared at the book and Randall blurted that it was insanely cool. Then Murren leaned in as Randall kicked off his explanation about the extra skills he'd unlocked from the fusion. Randall said that the moment they signed the contract, their powers fused on the spot, stronger, faster, and way more dangerous, boosting Ray, Ace, and Murren as the familiar got stronger. Myron stared in shock at what that guy pulled off, then crossed her arms and blurted that she'd never seen or heard of a necromancer in her life, so when Randall caught it too, he demanded, "Is that really true?" The boy told her that back when he was a tamer, everything felt totally different. Then Murren saw him again and heard the same news. Randall grinned and admitted he never told her the truth. Right then Randall snapped to it, telling her everything was the only way, the full journey from tamer to necromancer, all the way through what he'd lived. He kicks off the tale with, "Back when I was the dead weight on my team," and really, when you compare that to his life now, he's got Ray and a roof over his head, and that alone makes him genuinely happy. With a grin on his face, he couldn't help but flash back to those rough days when he didn't even have a bed to sink into. He just grabbed whatever he could and made it work. The guy who'd been sitting in that tiny barn with his spirit leaned toward the window spotted his team outside, and even though it was supposed to be a meeting for everyone, they never included him, and that sting hit hard. Suddenly, Randall caught a hair-raising scream. One of the team members was going off on Fido, spitting out how much longer he'd keep tolerating Randall's presence. The loud-voiced knight calling himself Loweg tore into the room as the top-ranking team's main knight, snapped that he didn't care one bit that Randall was the leader's childhood friend, then slammed that Randall was useless to their crew, before Loweg warned that the quests they're taking now aren't toys anymore, and the tamer kept listening, pressed right up against the barn wall. Right when the guy's beast was with him, rage flared in that wolf's eyes, because it saw its master get shaken by those words, so the wolf snapped into action and started howling at the top of its lungs. Randall rushed in to calm Ray down, but the second he did, it only blew up in the house. Loweg snapped that the beast tagging along with them was roaring too loud, and there was no way anyone was getting sleep. Quella, the head priest of the top team, stood there as a slightly worried girl blurted out that Randall was giving it everything he had. No way could they just toss him aside. General Mail, clutching a huge sandwich, leaned in and declared, "Randall's a good guy, because even if he's not exactly brilliant, at least he can cook." Lloyd spun back to the last guy in the group and told him, even with all the fighting the others had thrown at it, they still had to do something, right now. Fado, yeah, the group's leader, sat hunched in the corner on a stool, let out a heavy breath, and told them straight up that there were problems only Randall could handle. Then the guy shifted, folded his hands behind his head, and said, "There's always a risk you can't change." Fadu nodded, saying everyone else can cover it with teamwork. Loga let out a furious, loud hiss to show exactly how fed up he was, then stormed for the door, leaving the meeting behind, because the guy insisted he had to get a good night's sleep. Randall snapped his gaze up from Ray and immediately heard the chaos, everyone packing up and bickering that they had to go underground tomorrow, while the guys buzzed with excitement, praying it all somehow worked out. Just as everyone started rising from their seats, Randall didn't see it coming at all. Wham! A brutal blow cracked the wall, shot straight to steal the tamer's attention. The second Randall snapped around and Ray sprang to attention. Lloyd's scream cut through the air. He was making damn sure Randall heard him this time. The team's leading knight roared that if that damn dog barked one more time, Randall would have to pay with his life in front of the whole crew. Randall checked his spirit one more time, then started gently petting him, insisting that Ray needed to hear this wolf's message, only for the wolf to whimper softly, and that sound instantly broke his heart. Randall had zero clue how things spiraled this far, and he hated bringing it up. Still, the guy acted like he was nailing his job perfectly. He started blurting out how basically useless he was in battle, and that's why his experience came slow. While everyone else surged ahead, he could barely even keep up. And honestly, that's exactly how it felt to him back then, until he looked at Ray. Ray grinned and basically told him, "Yeah, turns out I'm the only one who thought that about myself." Even though Ray used to be completely wild as a wolf, this beast's brain was razor sharp, and its emotions hit just as hard. The wolf got every detail down perfectly, then threw his full support behind his master, while Randall erupted into laughter, insisted he was ticklish, and asked Ray to help him. Randall started petting the wolf and pouring out words of gratitude, and while his comrades kept treating the guy like trash, only Ray stood by him. Randall wrapped his arms around his beast, clinging tight like he never wanted to let go, and Ray clearly loved it too, because his grin said everything. Then Randall admitted Ray was his best friend. That wind lit a fire under the whole team. Quella slammed her hands to her chest and prayed to God to cover them today, while Mail shook his head and insisted, flat out, that God didn't even seem real. Randall trailed behind the whole team, lugging every last thing they'd need once they stepped into that dungeon, and that heavy load kept dragging behind him so he couldn't always match their pace. Loic snapped toward the tamer and started ripping into Randall. "Don't you dare slow us down, speed it up." Then the guy even threw in, if he couldn't haul the luggage, he was good for nothing. Right there, Fadot stepped in, restated the main knight's message smoother, and took the edge off the whole mess, so the leader finally turned to Randall and asked, politely this time, to push even faster. Today's outing mattered more than anything to the whole team. Half of them were sweating over how it might turn out. Then Randall lifted his head and promised, "I'll give it my best." Soon they closed in on their destination, the Dioside's dungeon, a crumbling old cathedral of solid stone. Loic tore forward, breaking into a sprint, and the kid yelled for the others to keep pace. Randall whirled to his wolf and ordered, "We're running too." Randall couldn't shake the feeling that this would be his final ride with the team, and that if it really was, he'd spend it making himself useful one last time. The second they stepped inside, the team sprinted down several floors, then the monsters ambushed them out of nowhere, swarming in huge numbers. But every single thing still played out like the old script, like it always does, while Loheg battled the monsters and, without missing a beat, snapped at Randall to get out of the way. Quella si volto verso la notte di secantono duro non era il momento di sistemertutto. Male, Piro, la fista scudo, strinse I denti ringio quanto fas duro andare avanti propria adesso. Fido and Randall backed off for a quick breather, and when Liger swung his head to the boy, he snapped that Randall must not jump into a fight yet. Fadu said the guy's job now was to keep eyes on the team's chaos and report fast if reinforcements from other floors started closing in on the monsters. Randall nodded and said he got it all. Loheg was seething with rage as the big quest kicked off, and you could tell he had it out for Randall too, because the moment he clenched his fist, he snapped that Randall was totally useless. Fedo yanked the knight of his team up and hurled his sword over his shoulder, while the leader snapped at Laik to calm down, because yelling now would only make things worse for everyone. Ray kept scrambling to shield Randall from the monsters as they pushed forward, and the boy himself screamed at Fado, 5 more are coming from the left. They got boxed in from every side, standing shoulder to shoulder in a tight circle, each one gripping their own flank, while Randall stared at the mess and knew if it carried on like this, they wouldn't last long. Ray charged toward a monster on his own. Randall never even told him to, while Randall only managed to bark at the wolf to stop, and just like that, the others surged forward and crashed into the broken ring. Randall managed to shout that he was getting hit from behind, and before the knight could finish the sneak attack, Lloyd spun and smashed him, straight up taking his head clean off from behind. Loic roared with fury and hurled an insult at Randall. Then the boy launched into an accusation that the tamer had let the monsters slip past his flank, cursing nonstop as he swung his sword. Sensing danger closing in fast, Quella stumbled back, gripping that sacred spellbook tight as she prepared to cast more magic and power up her crew. Suddenly the girl let out a blood-curdling scream, and every single team member snapped their heads toward her, while Quella slowly peeled her hand off the wall. As the girl lifted her hand to inspect it, she couldn't make sense of what she was seeing, and Randall immediately barked at her to stop touching the lulls, because poison was on them. Lloyd gasped again, then leaned hard on Randall, yelling that the guy was mocking them, and the knight snapped back, accusing him of not even being able to spot the primitive trap. Randall's fury kept spiking as the guy yanked off his bag in a panic, tearing through it until right there, he spotted the antidote. As the tamer dug through the bag, the guy was already wrestling with the priest's hand, fast, urgent, and way too close, while the girl snapped around with a menacing glare and ordered them to stop worrying, telling him everything was fine and he should just keep going. Logue couldn't rein it in. He snapped back to his old ways and started screaming that Randall was useless, but the team chaplain stepped in and argued that the man really had tried too. Randall slung the bag over his shoulder and kept moving, and not long after, they finally stopped, while the tamer whipped up lunch for the whole team using the almost ready supplies. After everyone stuffed their faces, Fathu barked the order time to roll out, swap the team's general formation, and reshuffle who's doing what. Spinning toward Mail and Loig, Fathu snapped that they'd go back to their usual duo, Loig handling things like always, while Mail prepared the strike, and the guys didn't even hesitate, they agreed on the spot. Then the leader snapped to Quella, the priest girl, and promised that Fathu himself would stand watch, timing a brutal periodic strike, and from this point on, Quella would back him up. With everyone nodding like the leader finally made sense, Fido burst out, "All right, then we're pushing forward," and Randall snapped his gaze to the wolf, adding, "Yeah, we're moving forward too." They slipped into yet another corridor, and wow, the ceilings shot up so high it felt wrong. Then they spotted the terrifying threat waiting right there. Loic, a little freaked out, snapped his gaze upward and blurted that the guild's rumors say the boss of this floor is a minotaur. Quell looked up too and added, "This is the dungeon of the Godslayers." Randall himself trembled too, staring straight ahead, because towering minotaurs blocked their path, not just one but 5 of them, and each beast was nearly 10 times bigger than the heroes. With seconds ticking down, Fathu snapped his head to the boys and screamed for them to run, and honestly, nobody on the team thought they'd ever face a call like that. Loig pleaded again that they couldn't run, because it was already too late, they'd met the floor boss. Still, the priests promised they could save themselves if they sprinted away from the 5th floor. The mage snapped no point in fighting 5 bosses, and the whole crew bolted into a sprint, while Randall struggled to keep up, stuck with that heavy bag jacked up on his back. Randall kicked into a sprint too, but he clearly started to fall behind, and when he wheeled around, he told Fado he had luggage. Then the leader roared that since Randall was the one responsible for him, he'd better get his job done and stop whining. Quell spun around and yelled again, cutting right through the chaos, saying now was not the moment to fret over that, and it was the worst time to keep arguing. Then he shouted that they had to run. Remembering that, Randall let out a hard breath and said this is how their teamwork was always forged, and back then, even the guy in Ray was in danger too. Randall knew one thing for sure. You can't sprint while hauling around for 5 people's stuff. Loic spun on the mage and barked at him, and the knight muttered that the girl always bragged she was a genius, yet right now she couldn't come up with a single thing. There's one glaring answer nobody's dared to say out loud yet. If one person sacrifices themselves, the rest can survive and finally break out of the labyrinth. The boys kept sprinting, and before long Fido caught it. Loig kept glancing sideways at Randall. Then the guy blurted out, "Brilliant idea." Loig flashed a grin and yelled that they'd found the perfect victim candidate. He stayed right beside Randall, eyes locked on him as they ran. Randall blinked in shock, snapping that Loig couldn't possibly be serious right now. Quella said it was too much, but Loig shot back at once, saying Quella could go in his place. Loic twisted Aquella's face toward him with a wicked grin and shouted for her to come closer, demanding she sacrifice herself, while you could see her whole body trembling with pure terror. Quella was terrified she was about to die, and the survival instinct slammed into her hard. Then she shot a sad look at Randall and sprinted. Randall snapped his gaze back to the girl, and in that instant it all clicked. No explanation needed. Her eyes already screamed the choice the team's head priest had made. The moment Quella cranked up her speed, everyone else caught the signal and surged forward too, while Ray and Randall, weighed down by heavy bags, started to fall behind fast. Randall, the Force's guy, was running out of time, watching his team basically ditch him, and that panic turned into raw frustration. Still, he kept charging ahead, muttering curses under his breath. He stared them down and immediately got it. This was a trap, and they were using him as bait to slip out. If Randall didn't strike right now, it was game over for him. Out of nowhere, someone came charging toward Randall. Then his world snapped into focus as he recognized his old childhood friend in Fido, the team leader, so Randall stared back in shock. It really was him, and in that split second, joy exploded in Randall's chest like a bomb. Deep down, Randall knew the team would never pull that on him, and right then, the tamer thought he'd been saved. The masked face cracked into a smile, and Randall's like, "Hey, can Fathu help me with my stuff?" But before he could finish, Fathu snapped his name out loud, stern as thunder. Fathu kept pace beside him, yet didn't lift a finger to help. Then the leader kept talking, straight up saying that once this dungeon was cleared, he planned to kick Randall out of the team. Randall snapped his gaze toward his friend, the spark in his eyes fading a notch, because why would anyone bring this up right now? The leader leaned in and said there was one more detail. Fedat told Randall he could still flip his decision today, and Randall spun around in pure shock, then demanded from the group leader, "What are you talking about?" Right after that question, Fathu whipped around and the guy's face snapped into full view, and the team leader grinned like he meant to hurt somebody, radiating pure malice. Terror seized Randall, so he blurted the wolf's name right away, begging him to help, while Fido yanked his sword into his grip, snapping that it was pointless. Ray spun around, ready to guard his master, but that huge bag on his back slowed the beast down, and right then Fathu came swinging, clocking Randall as he tried to leap out of the way. The team leader had poured everything he had into taking Randall down, so he'd be stuck right here in the dungeon, bait for the boss. No one expected Fido to snap like this because he'd never acted this way before, but in the end, he finally admitted it all, saying he did it for the common good. Fathu snapped in a sneaky hit that wasn't meant to kill, tagging Randall just long enough to buy his team a breath, while the Minotaur was still tangled up with that other guy. Then the tamer's strength gave out and his knees hit the ground. The leader grinned once more and told Randall to drop the grudge. Yeah, it really was for everyone's good, just not so one teammate could personally cash in. The Minotaurs started reeling the boys in, slower now under all that heavy size, and Vado warned, "If one of you dies here, they'll remember it forever." Randall shot a furious glare at the laughing Fado, and the leader snarled that he'd die like a legend, so he didn't need to worry, he just had to step up and sacrifice himself. Those were the final words Fathu slammed into his ears that day. Then the boy snatched his sword, stole one last look at the Minotaurs, and bolted, leaving Randall standing alone. Randall stayed hunched under a heavy bag on his shoulders, spitting furious curses that Fado hadn't gone easy for a second, while the Minotaurs kept closing in, step by terrifying step. Randall finally snapped to the truth. He understood he was going to die, and the second he looked forward, it felt like the world had nothing left to give. All at once, a blur of faces and memories crashed into his mind, and he couldn't help remembering Fido, the one who betrayed him in the end, and Loic, who'd hated him from day one. Two girls from that team, one remembers only the meals the guy cooked for her, and even the priest who looked after him, but that's all from back then. None of them were even looking at that guy now, just like they hadn't back then, and all the grit he fought to pour into the team just drained away. The Minotaur was already lunging in his direction, and the guy's shadow swallowing him said it all. Randall figured he was finally done with this nightmare, and now he could rest. As the Minotaur slammed down with his massive club, a sudden howl cut through the air, and right after it came the chaos of a full-on brawl. Randall spun around just in time to see Ray fighting to protect him. Randall panicked over his pet, blurted out its name, and begged the wolf to stop the fight and flee from here, but the beast kept snarling and striking, even though it wasn't stronger than the one it was battling. The Minotaur clamped onto the wolf, and as it snapped at his neck, it got yanked and slammed straight into the wall, thud. Then the beast let out a miserable, whiny whimper. Even after that brutal shove, the wolf didn't fold. This beast fought with more than just razor teeth and deadly claws, because its forehead horn charged into battle too. But the Minotaur still crushed the wolf in numbers. Then one of the bosses swung his club and smashed the ground where Ray stood, and the hit landed so hard it made Randall shriek. Randall kept staring as Ray showed guts and loyalty, but the Minotaur just kept yanking the wolf away and tossing it aside, then rained down crushing hits with his club. Randall roared at his wolf, pleading for it to stop tearing into him, and with pure despair written across his face, he screamed that the wolf had to break free and live. The boy was already bawling on his knees. Finally someone cared about him the way that tamed beast did. And Randall, he'd always seen the kid as his best friend. But Randall still couldn't figure out why that wolf wouldn't leave him, so the tamer bellowed at it with every ounce of breath, because the boy was born so Ray wouldn't have to risk everything and sacrifice himself for someone like Randall. The Minotaur kept shooing the wolf off, but the game looked like it was done. He clamped the animal in his grip with iron certainty, and Ray kept straining, desperate to rip himself free. The Minotaur snatched the weapon that could flip this whole fight, the sharpest axe of all, then grabbed the wolf with one hand, pulled the boss's swing through, and smacked Ray right on the head. It was brutal to watch, and Randall finally stopped swallowing his feelings, because he knew what kind of pain he'd already faced when he saw Ray die first. Memories crashed back into his mind, only this time they weren't about those traitors at all. They were about his friend Ray, the guy who backed him up every step of the way and never left his side. Randall kept looping those memories from their last night, replaying them again and again, because that's when the tamer dropped the truth. There could be no better comrade than Ray. Just a few meters ahead in front of the guy, a wolf lay sprawled out, bleeding out motionless now, with the bag tied to its belly still stuck there. Tears tore down Randall's face as he roared his wolf's name again and again, heaving himself upright and sprinting straight toward his body. The Minotaur loomed behind Randall, stone-calm and utterly untired, while the boys dropped to their seats across from the wolf they'd just slain, and the hallway kept screaming back, "Oh no, Ray." Randall suddenly knew soon he'd meet their friend, and right then an axe flashed above the tamer's head, flying straight toward him. Just as the blade hung a few centimeters from him and Randall slammed himself into the dirt, Ray suddenly burst back into view, standing right between him and the weapon. The boss's strike slammed into the bull's horn, and you could tell he never saw that twist coming, because he went wide-eyed and off balance in an instant. Ray shot up and clamped his teeth into the Minotaur's neck. This time the Minotaur couldn't hold back the wolf, and Ray wasn't about to let them get another shot at living, because the wolf ripped away a chunk of flesh, tore through an artery, and blood blasted out. Randall couldn't process what he was seeing. He jolted up to Ray, trembling, and demanded, "Is it me?" Then he looked down and saw the dead wolf's body sprawled right there. After just a short while, the boss of the God Slayer dungeon's 5th floor was sprawled all over the place, right around Randall, while Ray stood close by, and somehow the wolf's body ended up right there too. Randall scanned the scene, totally lost, and the moment the guy opened his mouth to explain, a brutal headache slammed into him like a truck. Randall finally cracked it. He'd met the necromancy requirements. He de-gulped down the power of the wolf in 5 minotaurs, and with a burst of raw energy, Ray snapped into reach for use. Randall whipped his head toward the wolf standing right in his face and in a shaky voice started calling him by his pet's name. Then the wolf snapped back at once, grinning like he'd been waiting for it. Randall breathed a huge sigh of relief. The wolf was alive and right there with him. Then the moment he reached out with his hand, he froze, realizing he couldn't touch it, not even with his own form. Randall realized in an instant his pet wasn't just acting weird, it was slightly transparent and hovering off the ground, and when the wolf stared at him, it could tell something had changed as the beast hit its radar. Randall stared down and felt his stomach drop. Ray was dead, and it was because of him. That wolf had fought to the very end, shielding the boy with its life. Then it started hopping in place, yanking Randall out of his shock as he desperately tried to figure out why. The guy finally got the real reason behind the wolf's joy, and right then, Ray's power surged. Randall was convinced it all came from the necromancer's ability, and now the guy understood Ray's feelings like never before. The wolf didn't even flinch at his own death, no shock, no rage, just raw pride as he guarded his master to the bitter end, and even beyond death he'd still serve. Now the beast has grown far stronger and will stay by Randall forever. And it hit Randall hard. Tears burst out of him again and again. He finally understood this. Even with the wolf's death pinned on the owner's inexperience, Ray was still just relieved he'd stayed close. The wolf still flashed that grin and floated in the air, and Randall dropped to one knee, bowing to the beast like a true warrior and thanking him for his favor. Now the real question hit him hard. What on earth was Randall supposed to do with these dead minotaurs? He stared at their bodies for a moment, then dropped his bag to the floor. Randall paused, rubbing his chin, and suddenly it clicked. When he unlocked the necromancer skills, that voice had warned him the boy had swallowed the power of the minotaurs. Staring at the fallen boss corpses again, Randall's mind raced. Could necromancy let him steal their power, or were there brand new skills waiting to be unlocked? Randall inched toward the bodies step by step until it hit him. If I'm a necromancer, I can summon them. After Randall finally processed what he'd just seen, one of the boss's bodies twitched back to life, then snapped upright and launched at the guy, right into his face at full height, and Randall was absolutely terrified. Randall thought the situation was terrifying at first, then he spun toward the Minotaur in front of him, realizing it was the same nightmare that had hit Ray. Then it means that spirit is officially under Randall's control now. He stared down at his hands, and an eerie aura started to swirl around him. When the guy stared at Randall's hand as he clenched it into a fist, everything clicked. He finally saw exactly what kind of absorption ability Randall had, and just how brutally strong it was. Randall inched toward one of the dungeon walls, gritted his teeth, and tried it. He whipped his leg forward with everything he had, smashing a stone slab. After that punch hit, the damage screamed louder than ever, cracks spiderwebbed across the whole wall, and all the guy could do was mutter that it caught him off guard. Then he stared around, convinced there were maybe 5 minotaurs lurking here. So yeah, this power is called absorption, but don't miss the twist. Ray didn't lose his strength at all. It's more like everything gets fully separated. Then he checked the bodies they left behind, knowing minotaurs cost a fortune, and realizing Ray's body couldn't rot in that dungeon like trash. He stared at the minotaurs like, how am I gonna take them down from here? They were absolutely massive. Then out of nowhere he heard the twist. The rules to learn the skill Isle of the Dead were already satisfied. Randall couldn't stop asking what this mystery power really was. Just by its name, it sounded like it could move bodies somewhere else. And once he finally understood that, the necromancer wasted no time, diving straight into trying to use it. Jabbing his hand at Ray, the boy roared, "Coffin of the dead," and Randall's jaw dropped as the body burst into eerie light, rose off the ground inch by inch, and the wolf finally shrank into a tiny vessel. Staring at his own hand, the boy couldn't help but wonder, could this really be a storage spot? He could shove stuff in there, sure, but the real question was whether he could pull it back out. He popped the bottle open again, snapped his spell, and freed Ray's body once more. Then Randall grinned like, "This is awesome, now I can wipe those minotaurs out of here." Then Randall finally clocked it. This plan probably wouldn't fly for his luggage, and just as he processed that, the voice boomed back again, telling the guy that the Minotaur was up and ready to use. The boy spun around and found the Minotaur's body behind him, except it wasn't flesh, it was a spirit. Randall swore he collected everyone, but the Minotaur lunged for the luggage. Randall blinked in shock and asked the bull if he truly wanted to haul it. The bull grunted, hoisted the bag off the ground, and just like that, Randall thanked him. Randall grinned like he owned the moment and told the Minotaur, "Name it." The Minotaur hoisted the heavy bag, and right then Randall finally found his words. He offered it to the spirit, saying he'd name the bull Ace, and the spirit lit up with approval. Randall grinned, thrilled to finally have a new buddy, and when the guy told him to take care of Ace, the beast started mooing again, loud, proud, and totally satisfied. Once the boy named the Minotaur, he got the wild news. Ace's status had jumped after improving his familiar, meaning that naming it made him stronger, and Ray wasn't slacking either, because he'd already crushed 5 Minotaurs. Ray looked up again and grinned, realizing the same thing that had sparked in his spirits, that today, this guy had clawed his way from a regular baggage porter straight into a necromancer with serious power. He marched deeper into the dungeon, heart pounding as he wondered what horrors, and maybe other necromancers, waited around the next corner, but one thing was locked in. Randall was never going back to his old team. Now they had a whole buffet of choices: hunt down comrades, chase that hero dream, or dive straight back into clearing dungeons, because for the first time they were totally, completely free. While Randall's old squad pushed up the mountain, the climb hit a brutal wall. Loig's still fuming, swearing they've been here before, but this time the monster swarm is absolutely unreal. Fido snapped into action, shouting at the 2 girls that Loig and he would charge at the front, while the mage and priest stayed behind to shield their backs. Quella demanded they wait for the leader and insisted he should hang back and strike from behind, but Fadu snapped back that deadly enemies were right ahead, so Quella shot back, "If our backs are left exposed, we won't be able to protect a thing." What? Her expression snapped into something heavy, and as she stared at the ground, she whispered that everything would be different, because if Randall were here with them right now, nothing would feel this way. Mael blared at Loigu that he was squandering his strength, and the knight shot back at once, roaring at the team's mage to counterattack, without a single sound. He blared that he was helpless because the monsters kept swarming, and Mael shot back with a chilling jab, saying even Randall was better, which twisted the knight into something even darker. Loig started lashing out in curses, yelling that this nightmare wouldn't have happened at all if Randall, whom Loig railed at even while shouting his name, hadn't died, luggage and all. Fadu clocked every single detail unfolding around him. He watched the team link up with discord, all that cursing and raw aggression erupting in real time. Then bitterness hit them all, and he started tearing himself up, blaming himself for the bad call he'd made earlier. Fadu went stone still, shut off from the fight as if the world vanished. He just stared ahead and kept hearing Lloyd yell that his sword was already dull and wouldn't cut anymore, so Fadu tried to talk himself into believing none of this was on him. His hands started to tremble, then he tore into the last pack of monsters, screaming in fury as he hacked them down, finally spilling his raw emotions onto the team. Panic hit as she saw their once-calm leader explode with fury, then Woig snapped, screaming at them to get out and stay away from him, no interference. Kola shot a look at Fido as he answered Logue's question, watching as Logue warned the girl not to waste a single drop of mana, because if they could finally reach the third floor, those monsters' resistance would be way weaker. Fido finally skidded to a stop. Silence fell, broken only by the leader gasping and guzzling air like he'd run a mile. Then, out of nowhere, Fido murmured Randall's name. Fido's mind suddenly flooded with childhood memories, back when the boy always came out on top, got praised in their village, and was treated like their pride, while Fido stayed stuck in his friend's shadow. Fed up, burned through long, sleepless nights in his home library, piling through thousands of books and notes just to close the gap with his comrade, but time kept grinding on, and the results barely moved. Still, every conversation circled back to Randall, the so-called genius on a whole different planet, who kept sweeping first place in exams like it was nothing. One day, Fathu couldn't hold it in. He dipped his head toward his friend and blurted it out. The guy wanted to be like Randall, and now Fathu was asking him to share his power. Fadat soaked up everything that Guy knew, trained harder than ever, but still couldn't stand that he'd never outmatch Randall, so rage and jealousy took over. Once they teamed up, the guy shoved the work onto his friend, hid his own skill so no one would notice, and even then it kept stealing the spotlight from Fadat. That constant sabotage finally snapped the leader, and when the team started bringing up Randall again, Fadat exploded. Then the guy slammed out of nowhere, shouting, "Why are you in my way again?" After that scream tore through the air, the boy whipped around to face the monster creeping up behind him. Fathu jerked into position, swung his sword, and severed their heads in one brutal slash. Fathu was next in line to become the hero everyone wanted, but rage and grief still ripped him apart over his old friend, while their leader kept slashing with his sword, screaming Fathu's name again and again. After they pushed a little farther, Randall spotted a cluster of reward chests, and the guy crouched down fast, examined everything like a pro, and couldn't stop thinking, "These are incredible." The Minotaur jabbed a claw at one of the black cloaks scattered over the loot, and Randall's eyes snapped. Ace wanted him to wear it, so the boy threw it on right away. Yomi's cloak, once it hit his back, everything skyrocketed because it could swallow and absorb power. The necromancer's skills muttered into something stronger. Ray and Ace surged too, and now he could control just how visible they all were. When that last chance to tweak his visibility popped up, he got curious and decided to test the skill on the spirits. Ray and Ace clocked each other the second it happened. Seeing his companions smile back at him, Randall felt pure relief, and then it clicked, just like he'd guessed only the guy could see. So he figured people might freak out over Ace, and decided to make only Ray visible. Now it was time to sort out everything sitting here as your Godslayer dungeon reward, and yeah, there was a ton of it, but Ace could knock the delivery out with you. Randall spotted the reward pack and realized it was loaded with cool goodies his old team could have grabbed. Too bad it was way better quality than what he and his crew were using now. Ray and Ace clocked the team's memories, turning gloomy in the boys' hearts once again, so Randall steps in at once, snaps the fear out of them, and tells them, "Don't worry, it doesn't hurt me anymore." Randall vowed that the second he got back to the guild, there was no question he had to be there. He ditched the team on the spot because he could feel it too. They weren't just done with him, they were already trying to kick him out. Randall gave a guilty little grin, secretly hoping his old crew would lose their minds when they saw him still breathing, and he couldn't wait for the best part, seeing how his former friend, Fato, reacted. When the guild door blasted open, Randall and Ray strode in side by side, and every head snapped toward the one guy whose name had already turned into rumors and legends, like people were mourning him before he even showed up. Even Randall couldn't believe the outside world would care about him. Yet in no time, everyone heard the news, clocked that he wasn't with the people who came back, and realized the truth. This guy who'd been dismissed as useless had somehow drawn attention anyway. Suddenly, Randall caught a girl's scream. She looked like she couldn't even breathe from shock. It was Nina, and she burst with joy when she spotted the guy in his wolf ray, then blurted out that he'd somehow changed. Nina snapped back, apologized right away for her outburst, and blurted that the man's aura had totally flipped out of nowhere, something weird, not normal at all. Then she waved it off as not a big deal, grabbed him to sit down, and urged him to tell her everything. Meanwhile, a shout came from behind. Randall spun around, and there his whole crew was, still piled together, drinking like they'd been holding their breath, and you could tell how relieved they were to see their porter walk in alive. Randall turned with chilling calm, clocking the voice the second it hit, and called out to Fathu, cold, emotionless, like nothing had ever happened. But Fathu looked deathly pale and blurted the question that haunted him. "How did that kid actually survive?" Randall fired back that he'd wiped out all 5 Minotaurs and they'd fled from there, but Fato snapped that there was no way. That kind of wind didn't make sense when the enemies were 100 times stronger. Then Randall screamed that Ray, who'd bolted in to save him, had died in the dungeon too, and for the first time he couldn't keep his voice steady. Logue just smirked while he stayed planted at the table, and the moment Randall showed up, that guy's fists had already been locked tight, like he'd been waiting to explode. The knight then gave a nod to the spirit and said Randall claimed this mongrel was nothing but an illusion. Randall didn't bite on another dumb jab from the narrow-minded Loeg. He just spun away cold, and Loeg blurted that he'd run straight to the guild and tell them what went down. Randall had to jump in with something else right away, and when the necromancer announced he was quitting the team, it basically screamed he's getting booted, so Randall figured it was best to just let it slide. Loeg couldn't believe their team was getting tainted by a teammate's betrayal, so he shot to his feet, clamped onto Randall's arm and barked, "Stop." Logue, raging in his usual crude, obscene way, snapped at Randall, hurled insults, and insisted he was only trying to act like a different person, like he could talk back in that tone and get away with it. Randall just stood there frozen in place, while Lloyd snapped that he needed to quit acting all high and mighty, then called him a total dead weight, dragging them down with every step. Lloyd yanked to twist the man's arm, but Randall barely shifted, no flinch at all, and that shocked Lloyd because he couldn't believe a mere porter had power like that. The truth hit him fast. Randall had trained superhuman strength by absorbing the Minotaur's power, and it had now evolved into ultra-superhuman strength. Randall couldn't believe it. His extra skill felt unreal, just like he'd predicted, and Like was no longer in his way. Randall could shove him off at will whenever he pleased. Randall shocked everyone by doing it, and he told himself this kid wasn't the weakling from before anymore. Then Lloyd stumbled backward, snarling and cursing at Randall. But Lowig wasn't about to drop it. He swung with everything he had and clocked Randall right in the face, then snapped that he shouldn't get carried away, tossing out insults all over again. Randall stumbled backward toward one of the tables, and Fido snapped into action, yelling at the knight to halt, right now, before he turned the guild building into a bloodbath. Lloyd clenched his fist, stood over the necromancer, and barked that if that pathetic baggage porter had actually protected the luggage and done his job, none of this would have gone wrong. Randall pushed himself up to his feet, blinking hard as he asked if the word "screwed up" really just slipped out of his mouth. Then Mail, lounging at the table, shrugged and said Lloyd blew it by abandoning the vanguard, and that's exactly why Quella got wounded. Loic let out a shrill scream, barking at the mage to shut up, while Randall scanned for Quella with worried eyes, demanding answers about the wound, only for her to flash a shy smile and hold up her bandaged hand like everything was totally fine. Randall clocked that the girl's gear was busted too, and he refused to let her get tossed into a dungeon with only one wound to her name, so the guy snapped his fingers and promised, "I've got a robe she can change into." Everyone snapped their eyes to Randall in total shock, while Fido hesitantly started grilling him about what just happened. Then Quella burst out, yelling that this robe wasn't just better, it was even superior to the one she wore now. Feta erupted in outrage. Quella's robe was a sacred church artifact, and if the one Randall handed her was even better, then what on earth was that guy doing getting these things? He cut right into the conversation, flashing her genius like it was proof, then strode in with total confidence and declared that this was a reward handed down by the boss of the 5th floor. Randall kept his cool and told her if she needed anything else she could come to him with questions like that. Anytime Fido and Loig stared at the guy at first, then the smile lit up across the night. Lloyd snapped his head to Randall and said the kid could still come in handy sometimes, and the knight wrapped it up by insisting the trip wasn't a total loss, because if there's more here, then it's worth the ride. With that, Lloyd shot a wicked grin and thrust his hand forward, daring Randall to hand over every last thing he had on him right then. Randall froze in shock. Lyack calmly insisted the boy had heard him crystal clear, and then it hit him. It was Randall's fault they'd come back barely alive. Then he snapped that Randall would finally earn his keep, the moment they'd been waiting on, while Loig roared that the boy must be left with nothing, and Fido slammed in right away to stop it. The guild was buzzing with tense, sweat-soaked anxiety. Everyone had their eyes locked on what came next, and Nina stood right behind the necromancer, breath held as she watched every move. Randall never planned to listen to Loic, and when the knight scanned the area, he decided that backing down would make him look pathetic, so he blared that the kid had forced him and yanked Randall by the cloak. Right after that, something lunged up and clamped onto the guy. Then the ground yanked itself open beneath him. Everyone gasped, convinced Randall's telekinesis had just kicked in. To prove he wasn't playing around, Randall snapped his fingers, and boom, a massive minotaur tore into the guild, clutching Logue in its hand. The whole place erupted in terrified gasps. Randall calmly shrugged that the Minotaur he'd managed to kill in the God Slayer's dungeon once it died somehow came back as one of the guy's new companions. Fido snapped out of his surprise and started flailing his arms, yelling that Randall was nothing but a tamer, and he couldn't figure out where this guy had even dug up a dead familiar from. Randall just shot back that he'd already mentioned Ray's death. Randall promised he'd split the loot among everyone, but Loig snapped and started yelling that the whole thing was a setup, that Randall was probably laughing at them like the treasure was really theirs all along. Then Ace ripped Gil of Loig loose. He hit the floor with a brutal thud while Randall snapped, "I found 5 treasure chests," and grabbed the cloak for himself, leaving the rest to split among the crew. Nina blurted out right away, "Are you sure, Randall?" But his answer didn't budge. He stared at the crew of his old team and declared that this would be his final parting gift. Nina's stomach sank with this decision, because the moment she looked closer, she realized the girl believed these people weren't even worthy of the dungeon coins. Nina told him that if he was certain, they'd hand it straight to the guild. Then she asked if he wanted to throw them anything else, and Randall's mind instantly snapped to the Minotaurs. Randall insisted the boss's loot should be split evenly, but Nina shot back that Randall had every right to claim the bodies, because those guys were already defeated, and the attacker wasn't even part of the team anymore. Then she hit them with the truth. You can't just pretend the team caused 0 harm. Everyone in the group froze at how bold that sounded. The girl told me the guild wants you to scoop up anything useful first, then let the others haggle with the guild to get the transferred items. Randall nearly dropped the news when he heard the trade, but Loig and Fido were blown away even harder once they realized what it would ultimately cost them. The girl told them that, based on the price of everything she'd spotted, Nina could pretty much figure out how many resources were being mined. Then the whole team could finally march into the guild and buy whatever they wanted. Loig was about to lunge forward and blast Nina for spewing nonsense, but Fido shot his hand out and slammed the brake on him, ordering Loig to quit acting like that. Fido stepped up and decided it for the entire team. Then the guy swore he understood it all, and Loig instantly exploded with indignation, insisting they should get the truth firsthand. Fido made it crystal clear, if they wanted everything from Randall, they'd have to pay on the spot, because with a brand new dungeon looming, the group had already burned through every last coin and now they were flat broke. Nina bowed with careful grace, thanking Fido under her breath for finally understanding. Then she spun to Randall and waved him over to their reception desk. Nina hit him with a quick "Wait, am I getting this right?" and asked Randall to confirm, and when he nodded, she explained that they'd dump everything at the guild first, then later they'd hammer out the exact price. Randall nodded and promised he'd leave it in her hands. Nina grinned and said, "Let's talk about leaving the team and check in alone just for now," moving it to another room. Loig told Randall to hold up for a second, then grabbed him again, only for the night to explode, accusing him of running off and leaving them with nothing, and blaming Randall all over again for their failure. Loig claimed Randall wouldn't even break a sweat to reach the 5th floor, and right then Ray started growling at Loig with pure rage, spiking fear in everyone's chest. Loig snapped around and stared straight at the spirit of the one-horned wolf, but he didn't even get what he was looking at, because its aura felt totally alien, and the thing was way stronger than it had been a moment ago. People in the crowd started buzzing about Ray, saying he was insanely strong, while others shrugged and went, Loig got exactly what he deserved, because the moment fear hit, he couldn't even move. The tension kept cranking higher and Ridge finally felt totally useless. He couldn't do a thing to Randall. Then the night soured on everything, and he turned around and walked away, cursing the whole world. After Loig walked off, Fido snapped at Randall too. Then Randall spun around, and Fido told him their night had said enough, even if there was still a sting of truth in it. Fido admitted Randall had gotten freakishly strong without telling his team, and that's exactly how it all spiraled right in front of him, until Randall snapped and cut off his old friend, calling Fido out by name with a hard stare, then demanding to know if Fido could even hear what he was saying. Randall, with a sting of sarcasm, echoed Fido word for word, "You didn't tell us anything," then snapped back like, "Honestly, it's more like he never even gave me the chance to." Fido finally stood up in public and confessed he alone was the one to blame, while Nina yanked the guys to a stop and told them, "Listen to Randall from the start, or you'll never get the real truth." Fido snapped in fury, shouting that they could still speak up. Then Nina cut him off fast, reminding him they'd already said everything before Randall even showed up. Nina stared at the guys and said it was just like Randall wanted, for him to throw himself away. Her crew tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. She then claimed they kept handing Randall jobs to do, and he kept ditching every single one, until in the end, Randall died in the dungeon. Nina shot a look at the leader and demanded to know if she was really telling the truth. Feta opened her mouth to speak, but Nina barreled in on the spot, raising her voice. She declared that if their testimony was a lie, the guild would slap them with a blacklist as adventurers who turned in false reports. The Mina snapped that they needed to understand this. Trashing a guild is a crime, and if they're caught, every one of their S ranks gets stripped, plus extra punishments depending on what they did. Nina said loud and clear, "They'll put a bounty on your heads and plaster my face all over the city," then added that the guild would cross-check Randall's testimony with everyone else, run a full trial, and weigh what every side claims. In the end, Nina said, "If anyone's got objections right now, speak up, I'll listen. But if you guys are good with everything, I'm counting on us to work together again." Fadu opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He just stood there, mute and staring at Nina, while the guild worker clocked that nobody had a problem, then marched over to Randall and told them they had to leave. Nina and Randall started walking toward the far end of the room, and Quella's eyes snapped to Fadu. Tears streamed down his face as the crushing defeat they couldn't dodge closed in. Just when everyone thought that was it, the girl suddenly yelled that they should stop. She wanted to wait for Nina and Randall too, and the guys started turning around, totally confused about what else their leader could possibly need. The girl slammed her hand into a fist and demanded they take her with them, so sudden it knocked the air out of the room, leaving an awkward silence hanging there. Mail insisted there was zero reason to stick with Loig, because that night had been stirring up trouble with his order since the day he started adventuring, and the guild wasn't about to shrug off his latest statement. The maid shrugged off S-ranks like they were nothing. She even doubted they'd last long enough to keep adventuring. So when it came down to Fado or Randall, the choice felt painfully obvious. Rage boiled in Fado's veins as he snapped his head sideways at his two teammates, except they looked like his former teammates too, and he couldn't stop wondering what on earth those girls were up to. Randall believed Mail was the one who pushed the idea, using that guy as bait, and she was sure of one thing: he'd get killed. Loic S not walking out of this one without scars. He basically threw himself on display in front of the whole hall, loud and proud, and the damage is coming. And don't think Fadu's getting away clean either, because as the leader, he's right in the blast radius. So Randall instantly knew this was the girl's only shot at salvation, and the second the pressure hit, they were ready to flip on their comrades without wasting a second. Randall spun around and shot back, saying, "We're only saying this for our own good, because the necromancer has zero interest in teaming up, and he's not about to fight alongside us, no chance." Quella probed Randall with a shaky voice, and she could tell the kid was shutting her down, hard. Randall snapped back that he wouldn't even hear a single word she tried to throw in her defense. The girl snapped her mouth shut, lower lip trembling as the truth hit. Maybe they'd gone way too far, and Randall was paying for it now. Nina shouted at the guy, telling him they could leave. The guild worker and Randall hauled ass after him to the hotel room, while the tamer's old crew stayed downstairs, staring in shock as the load carrier suddenly got stronger than every last one of them. Up top, the girl yanked out a tiny pouch of coins Randall had been paid for the goods and the minotaurs, then pulled out a book and told him the same guy had turned into a necromancer, and that this thing would help him a ton. After Randall spilled everything, Nina locked eyes with him and snapped that his old team's move was pure reckless madness. Randall scratched the back of his head, grinned like he just hit jackpot, and admitted Nina was right, then added, still baffled, that he can't wrap his mind around how dying turned him into a necromancer, because somehow death made him even stronger. Nina explained she wasn't talking about the guy right now. She meant the time when he was still a real tamer, and even the guild could see it. He was the team's backbone. Randall snapped at Nina to stop joking like that, because the moment he heard it, the guy puffed himself up as a totally useless tamer, loaded with all kinds of junk, and still somehow believed she was seriously overrating him. Nina insisted she wasn't even exaggerating. Then she shot back that only a seasoned tamer could iron out every team flaw and carry the whole weight on their shoulders. Nina leaned in and said that without Randall, Team Fado never would have snagged those coveted S-ranks, and Randall just stared at her, sheepish as ever, like, "Wait, you're sure?" Nina also spilled that when Fado personally tried to kick Randall out of the team, she planned to confront the tamer, but then Lowig barged into the talk, stealing her chance, and now she regrets it to the bone. Nina never imagined things would spiral into this. Nina then pushed for one more answer. She asked straight up about Quella and Mail, since they could team up with Randall under his command, but the guy cut her off immediately and denied it flat out. Nina slowly pushed herself up from her seat and warned that it would be a tragedy for the guild to lose a team this high-ranking, especially since, even though they weren't near the royal capital, they were right there on the front lines. Since the Margrave's in danger and needs protection, they'd gladly welcome top-tier adventurers, so the girl stepped in, offering to help find a crew for Randall, but the boy cut her off, apologizing first. Then Randall pressed a hand to his chest and smiled, saying that starting now, he'd travel alone. And with that, the kid could finally stand proud and declare it, he was a free man. Nina blinked at the guy in pure surprise, then boom, she relaxed and grinned, saying she understood everything, and the girl even awkwardly added that the guild must have sent an S-rank team. Nina suddenly blurted out, all awkward, "If I really want to hook Randall up with someone, would you mind?" Randall grinned and said, "If you're serious and she insists, I'll think about it." The guild worker lit up like she just hit the jackpot. She grinned wide, then sprinted back to her duties, swearing she'd dig up nothing but the absolute best. Randolph finally finished his tale to Murren, saying he'd been flying solo his whole life until he met that girl, and boom, here they were. Murren stared at the boy and admitted it couldn't have been easy doing everything alone, and Randolph grinned, because for him, it was the exact opposite now that he finally felt totally free. Then Randall leaned in and admitted that he'd never crossed paths with Myron if he hadn't landed that freebie, and the moment he said it, Myron burst into loud, unstoppable laughter. The girl sprang up and declared she never once doubted it. Of course Randall would be thrilled to meet a comrade like her, and Randall answered back with heartfelt gratitude. Myron thought she'd get way more compliments, but it didn't ruin her vibe at all. She just smiled and told them it was time to sleep, because tomorrow was packed with work. Meanwhile, the whole Father crew sat crammed in their room, hands on their heads like it was the end of the world. Quell snapped that it couldn't have ended this way, while Loic fired off furious curses at Randall. Mel threw her cover over her face and, sitting on the bed, said she already knew exactly who to blame. Loic clutched his fists, sprang up, and snapped, demanding to know why Mel was acting like she was bragging. The girl stayed there, trembling with tears, insisting it was already over. Nothing could be changed now. They'd done everything, and even the blacklist was sobbing for what they'd left behind. It felt like the end for them, everyone knew it, and they kept staring at each other in terrified silence, both trying to dodge eye contact like it might burn. Meanwhile, Father hovered by the window, unable to shake the thought of how much longer Randall would keep crawling into his life, and he knew the end couldn't be far, even if he had to stay buried in the shadows a little longer. When morning finally hit, Randall and his new buddy, Myron, marched into the forest to lay the animals' bodies to rest, because now those spirits had become their guardian, the boys' protectors. As soon as she mentioned the procedure, everyone blurted that the spirits would be trapped forever and never return to their bodies, so she shot back, "Are you sure?" And they instantly nodded, no hesitation. The girl nodded once, grinned like she finally got it, and said she understood the spirits perfectly, then snapped her fingers, and a black aura spread over the ground and surged upward. Everyone just froze and stared. Then the bodies on the ground started to melt into the earth like liquid, swallowing them whole, until after a couple more minutes, there was nothing left to see. Right after that, a blinding flash tore through the air like an explosion. Randall flinched, threw his hand over himself, and when the light faded, there they were, two horns, one raised and the other belonging to Ace. The girl grinned and kept her hand in control, and the moment she felt the results, she laughed, because it came out even better than she'd dared to hope. The two objects that tethered the spirits to this world lifted off into the sky, streaking straight toward them, and Ace and Ray stared in shock like, "Wait, what's about to happen?" The Minotaur's horn and the one-horned wolf's horn started fusing with the spirits, blasting right through their intangible bodies. Then, just like that, another blinding flash of light erupted. Randall's head blasted the news. His status would skyrocket thanks to evolution. Every companion surged in power, and Ace instantly leveled up into a whole new form. Randall raved that it was incredible. Then Murren snapped that their bodies were still fine, but for their master they gave them up, sacrificed everything, and transformed into spirits to get even stronger. Ray stepped into the Fenrir ranks too, and suddenly the beasts flocked to their master, nuzzling close like they couldn't hold back their feelings. Myron just grinned and said they truly, deeply loved him. Murren admitted it was kind of weird. Randall didn't get her at first, so she broke it down. She could see why they were drawn to the necromancer, even if it didn't make sense to him. Randall scratched his head and admitted that, right after he made a contract with Myron yesterday, he'd somehow picked up a bunch of skills, and now the guy was begging him to teach him how to use them. The girl stared at him, stunned, then Randall tossed out the exact same powers he'd claimed, Lord of the Night and Black Fog. Myron's scream tore through the air as disbelief crushed her. Myron snapped in rage, yelling that these skills were one of a kind, and even then the girl admitted she was terrified she'd never be able to use them again after the necromancer's absorption. Myron snapped out black mist at once, and when she reappeared in her true form, she stared at her hand like she was checking a loaded weapon, then let out a breath and said her skills were still completely under control. She warned that Randall could copy skills from other creatures, and then she revealed the real shock. Her own abilities were twilight magic, a rare gem even in the darkness attributes. The girl added point blank that only the ones who can control death itself can earn them, so Murren grumbled that it wasn't exactly fair to put him through that, but she was still ready to do it for her friend. While she was rambling about all of it, Randall just stood there in total silence, staring at her like something was off. So the awkward quiet hit her hard, and she panicked, rushing at him, convinced something was wrong. Clutching her head, Myron let out a breath and insisted they start with Black Mist, because yeah, the name actually matters. It lets you vanish into mist. Physical hits bounce right off high-level vampires, but when they're caught with their true weaknesses, the rules change. So if you slam on Black Mist, the blow never even gets to you, and yeah, that's as close to perfect defense as it gets, except the catch is brutal. The skill guzzles mana, making it hard to spam. She added that her second skill, Asterisk Lord of the Night ***, drinks in the user's magical power and uses it to conjure familiars. When Randolph fired the question, Murren snapped the answer right back. It was about conjuring a familiar, a soul forged from twilight magic. Randall could call it the girl's essence, but to human, it felt like pure miracle, because these beings don't just look powerful, they carry twilight power along with the same abilities. That's how Murren healed the boy's hand back then, and now Randall finally saw exactly how she pulled off that impossible trick. Randall suddenly blurted out another question, and the guy just stared back like, I don't get it, what's the point of that twilight magic Murren keeps rambling about? She just burst out laughing and told him Randall should have known all along, because everyone swore that if she drank blood, her lifespan would shoot up. So yeah, for her the undead version is basically the same thing as blood is for the rest of us, and that's twilight magic. The girl plopped down and said, death energy is special, then leaned in and added, what matters is how you use it and control it, and finished with, and that's exactly why we're the same. Randall stared at the girl and told her they were weirdly alike, but later, she admitted it didn't really matter. There wasn't much point in digging into it. Myron told the boy she had something else to show him, then the girl launched into the whole story, how Randall used dead spirit coffin on his familiar last night. They halted and Murren leaned in, saying she had the same thing, only way more advanced. The vampire snapped her hand upright, passed the skill over like a secret, and thunder rumbled at nightfall. He scanned the skill name and shock hit him hard, then the girl immediately nodded and said, that dead spirit coffin only lets you stash the dead, but my skill lets you store anything. Randall felt relief wash over him. This was exactly what he needed inside the Godslayer's dungeon, so the guy shot his hand out, testing his skill, and started reading the spell. His power hit the bags almost like the necromancer's old skill. He thrust his hand forward, and the bags instantly warped into a tiny bottle. Everyone gawked at the missing items, and just like that, they'd squeezed into one tiny glass bottle. Randall shot a relieved grin, sure he didn't have to lug luggage anymore, until he caught Ace's face and saw the sadness hit hard. Randall snapped his gaze up and grinned at the Minotaur, telling him not to sweat it, and the boy chimed in that Ace wasn't loved for hauling stuff. He was needed for something only he could pull off, and soon a job like that would come. That's why when the day finally arrived, Randall was desperate for Ace to help, and the boy promised he'd lean on the spirit. Ace threw his hands up high and hummed like he was thrilled. After they wrapped everything up in the forest, Randall kicked back into motion and declared it was time to hit the road. Then, boom, the second the words left his mouth, Randall snapped and remembered something important. Randall claimed that every rumor he'd heard said vampires were loaded with weaknesses, but somehow Murren crushed all the odds and thrived in the sun. Myron leaned in toward him and made one thing crystal clear. He needed to stop underestimating her. The moment her mood hit, Randall couldn't help but get a little scared. Myron leaned in and declared, I'm the Lord of Vampires, the great Lord of Darkness. Then she smirked like a storm and warned you, sunlight, holy water, silver, and crosses don't touch her, so don't try lumping her in with the cheap rabble. Randall paused for a beat, then decided to probe the girl's defense, insisting she should be able to handle attacks like that, only for Murren to shoot that idea down. The girl said her strange gift lets her dodge that kind of death, because if she doesn't use it, the moment she hesitates, she gets turned to dust, and the necromancer can't stop thinking about that. Then it all spilled out. Myron couldn't be killed, not unless she decided she wanted to be, and when the girl laughed, she practically bragged that nobody, not a single soul, could ever measure up to her. Randall came in with his question ready to fire, asking Murren what would happen if she got hypnotized. Then she grinned and told him there was still a real chance. Myron squirmed through the awkward convo and told them she could sometimes slip past hypnosis herself, and then she said they'd pick this up again later, when it actually mattered, not right now. Once the girl tore through the air and left Randall behind, the guy couldn't stop thinking about it. Then she smirked, teased him, and said she was thrilled for what came next, calling him an adventurer. Randall was itching to test his power, and suddenly, boom, wings burst out of him like a vampire lord, while Myron immediately lost it, screaming that it wasn't fair. She tried to get a word out, but a joyful Randall burst in, demanding to know what happened. Then he lifted himself higher, grinning like crazy as he declared he could finally fly. On the way to the guild, Randall started stretching mid-grumble, whining that he was wiped out, and then bragged that they could just fly in on the Black Wings, only for Myron to snap that there was no choice in the matter. If the guy ran out of mana halfway, he'd drop dead, so Randall even floated the idea of buying a carriage, but the girls shot that down and insisted they'd be way faster if they just mastered the skill. Randall mulled over the skills, but Myron yanked him forward at once. Then the necromancer slowed, stared him down, and asked if he was really sure everything was okay, before admitting the guild was on a mission to hunt down and exterminate vampires. Murren blurted out whether the guild was still at it, and Randall shook his head. No vampires and no government orders had shown up lately, so the missions had gone quiet. The girl gave a small, smug smile, fiddled with her hair, said everything was fine, and then turned to Randall like, "So, can we beat her?" Randall flashed a grin, soaking up the girl's command and confidence. Then he shot back that he doubted their strength was anywhere near enough. The guild doors burst open, and the whole place instantly clocked Randall walking in with a cute girl on his arm, and when the adventurers spotted his wolf, they realized it had ballooned in size a couple more times. Conversations kept flying at the tables, and everyone swore it was his companion. Doing that made that guy turn down Melee and Quella. On top of that, rumors spread that their crew kicked Randall to the curb, so he snapped back and rejected them too. Randall skyrocketed in the guild. Somehow he kept his S rank while all his old buddies fell behind, and when Murren grinned, she basically called him the real star. He spun around, flashed a grin at his companion, and told her that in his eyes she stood out way more now, in the best possible way. Myron didn't catch what he meant right away, so she pressed him. What did she do wrong? She told him she'd been studying people on purpose, and Randall burst out laughing like, "Relax, everything's fine." Nina spotted the couple and shot out a quick greeting to the guys from behind her counter. Then the guild worker clocked the girl beside him and leaned in, asking for her name like he already had a crush. The moment Murren's confidence surged back, she straightened up and told Nina, "That girl's got amazing instincts for people." Murren lined in, brushed Nina's chin with a tender touch, and when the vampire lifted her, she stared straight at her neck, so captivated by Nina's beauty she joked that it made even you want to bite her. Randall shot in and shoved his hand up to block Murren, then he fired off an apology to Nina for her weird behavior, introduced the girl by name, and finished with one simple line, "She's my new friend." Nina laughed and told Randall it was great to finally meet her, but he still swallowed the fear. Myron's in danger, so he had to stay sharp, and when she read his mind, she told him he was right. Nina leaned toward Murren and asked, "Can I take a registration test to prove my skill?" Randall jumped in, backing her up and practically hyping it like, "That would be so cool." Nina grabbed her tablet and said they'd put Myron and Randall to the test. Then the necromancer's eyes widened when he heard his own name, and Nina followed up with a sly offer to rethink his rank, only if he didn't mind. They burst onto a tiny training field, right there, a little table where the guild judge usually sits and a dummy standing in the center, while the guys were already fired up and ready to take the tests. Nina blurted out an apology and sprinted up to the boys. Then the girl snapped that Randall's partner was running late, so they'd check Myron first. Murren said she had no objections and was ready to start. Then she zoned in while Nina showed her exactly what to do, pointing to a target way out in the distance. Myron nodded and said she got it all, and then Nina leaned in. Once the girl was ready, she'd have to smash that exact ball any way she could. Murren broke into another smile and promised she understood everything. Then Nina hurried off to whip something up, only for the vampire to snap that he could feel it. Nina wasn't supposed to destroy that strange target. Randall let out a chuckle and admitted, finally, Myron had nailed it to his surprise. Myron just waved it off, eyes steady and pressed. "So tell me, how long can I really hold back?" When Randall asked if she had any weapons, she whipped out a pair of daggers and swore they'd been passed down through her family. Randall said, "Then we're good, she'll handle it, no question." And the guy threw in one more warning, "If the target ends up breaking, it won't be anyone's fault but the gun." Myron nodded and said the guy's plan was actually brilliant. Then Nina rushed to the vampire and told him they were done with the preparations, and the guild was finally ready to let the girl start her test. Nina dropped into her chair and started filling out the adventure forms, while Murren stood across from her, roughly 20 meters away from the ball, clenching a pair of family blades so tight her grip looked like it might snap. Nina spotted the girl's weapon and instantly figured she wasn't casting a single spell or lobbing any ranged attacks, yet those blades looked brutally dangerous. Nina guessed this was the princess from some far-off kingdom that Randall had been assigned to protect, and then Murren tightened her grip, burst out, and declared she was starting. In a blink, Murren closed the distance and tore in on the target, both blades crashing down so hard the thing shattered into fragments. As the target's remains crashed down to the ground, Randall snapped tense and started scrambling for excuses in his head, while Nina stared in shock at what just happened. The crowd erupted into loud chants and applause, shouting back and forth like they were in a stadium, and everyone's eyes locked on Randall, half in awe, half in envy, because the guy didn't just look like a dream, he was terrifyingly strong too. Randall didn't even hesitate, he sprang up and blurted at Nina, just as the crowd was shouting one of the versions, and the guy was insisting the target was probably too old. Nina said it felt right, then decided Birank would fit both of them perfectly. Murren panicked, asked if he was aiming too high, and Randall shot back that it was totally fine. Right behind the boys, someone suddenly popped up and blurted out a huge "wow," like they couldn't believe it. Then the stranger said that even if the target was old, the girl would still rip it to pieces. With a wicked grin, the girl attacked like she wasn't even human, and Myron fought back with everything he had, while Randall stared at her, stunned like he'd seen her before. Nina shot upright and blurted the guest's name, Lumanese. The guild worker snapped that the girl was late, while Myron just stood there utterly lost, like she had no clue what was happening. Murren leaned in and asked Randall if he knew her, then he nodded, saying he did, because she's the one with a once-in-a-century gift, the Holy Sword. She's also the youngest solo adventurer who still hasn't hit S-rank, wild right. And yeah, everyone whispers about Lumini's Rithos, the sacred sword, a diva legend of this world. Lumens cracked a nervous smile, and the girl tossed the sword aside, then declared she was exactly the legend all those wild rumors had been talking about. Then the girl drove her sword into the dirt, stretched out her muscles, and once she felt ready, grinned wide again, urging them to start the duel like, "We've both got lives to get back to." Randall. Randall kept staring as she got everything ready, then admitted he wasn't even sure how packed he really was, but he could tell for sure that Lumens was the kind of girl who was always swamped with something. The girl sucked in a deep breath, lifted her sword, and strode forward with total confidence, and right then, Randall felt something dark start to gather around him. He lifted his hand a bit, instinctively shielding himself because wow, what kind of brutal aura was she carrying? She was way younger, yet the pressure she was throwing out felt terrifyingly powerful. The girl gripped the sword with both hands, thrusting it straight out in front of her. One look was all it took to make her feel absolutely terrifying. Lumens blared, asking if Randall was ready, then surged forward on the spot, so Randall caught it instantly and knew he had to move too. The necromancer shot his hand forward and roared the spirits' names. Then Ray and Ace burst onto the scene at the boys' sides, immediately screaming battle cries that sent chills down your spine. Lumanese stared at it all, eyes locked in, and the girl immediately clocked what the necromancer's power was. Then, without hesitation, she already had a plan to take him down. The girl flashed a smug grin and shouted to the spirits that she'd arrived. Then she launched into a sudden jump, and just like that, Randall and his spirits couldn't see her anymore. Seconds later, Lumines burst into view above the necromancer and his lurking pets, charging straight for Fenrir with her sword. Ace the Minotaur clocked it instantly and launched into a brutal swing with his fresh weapon, one he'd only just unlocked after his last evolution into a unique class. After she struck down the one-horned wolf, the girl's eyes snapped to the bull's weapon swinging straight for her, so Lumanese, the seasoned warrior she was, dodged with ease before it could even land. The Minotaur reared back and started swinging again, and the girl just grinned, calling out that Ace was slow too. The bull lunged at the target, but the sacred sword slid off to the side again. By tweaking their tactics just a little, Randall's confidence slowly sharpened as they learned how to fight an enemy even trickier than every one before. But the sacred sword didn't fall behind. She synced with every strike, parrying each blow with razor-sharp control, because she knew she couldn't stop until she reached the necromancer himself. Ace and Ray kept trading attacks back and forth, so the Minotaur couldn't smack the second spirit out of nowhere, and that rhythm still left them stuck a bit, since the Limines always managed to slip out of every hit. The girl was just reveling in it, and she told them both spirits had steamrolled past A-rank in raw power. Luminize even said the Minotaur didn't look like some ancient wreck of a monster. The second the Minotaur slammed down, Ray lunged right back, gambling on the first strike with his horn, and the girl somehow turned every hit aside, cheering Fenrir as she did it. A brief hush hit the arena. Both spirits locked eyes on their opponent as she gasped for breath, and you could tell Lumens wasn't holding back for a second. Randall, stuck on the sidelines, felt his spirits surge. Then the boy shot his hand up and yelled at them to keep the same pace. Out of nowhere, something that totally threw Randall. She spun toward him and asked, with a sharp little edge, whether the necromancer was really confident he could stay this carefree during the certification. The girl whipped a blade at him, lifting it high as she did, because the sacred sword's warning was clear. He was acting like a coward, pushing his familiars into the fight while he just stood back and watched from the sidelines. Randall snapped back to his senses the moment he realized his guard slipped, and before the panic could stick, the boy shot out his hand, bellowed *black mist***, and cast it. while Luminez barreled toward him, growling for the kid not to forget who owned this test. The sacred sword struck true, slammed the blade down, and just like that, Randall vanished from beneath it, only leaving a chunk of his body on the side in a crawling black aura. Lumens was absolutely stunned by what that guy could actually do now. She stared at him in shock, because Randall had almost managed to snap back into his material form again, and he did it with barely any time to spare. The gap between them widened again, and the girl calmly smirked while telling him the guy had a handful of genuinely interesting abilities. Then she leaned in and added something else. Right then, Lumines burst in behind the necromancer and snapped that she still couldn't match her speed, while Nina and Myron, from across the distance, screamed his name in pure terror. Lumens was so pumped that the exam practice fight felt like a real battle now. She hoisted her sword, let out a fierce scream, and shouted that it was over. When the blade came screaming for Randall, he dropped to one knee. So many watching couldn't handle it and shut their eyes, not wanting to witness the young man's death. But after only a few seconds, they realized the necromancer was still standing. He clamped his hand over himself, stopping the sacred sword's massive blade from cutting through. Lumines couldn't believe what she was seeing. A cold sweat crept down the girl's face as she realized Randall just tore off his own arm, and she knew he'd keep swinging no matter what. The girl lifted her sword and then turned away, heading off down the road. Lumens grinned and insisted Randall wasn't nearly as bad as she judged at first glance. Then Randall smiled right back. Clutching his bleeding arm, the boy snapped that if she wanted him to pass, she'd better see that kind of grit, and when Luminez heard it, she smiled and let him through. Then the girl rose with a grave, shaking certainty and proclaimed, "I'm Luminous, the sacred sword of this country, and yes, Randall is worthy of the S rank, the honor only adventurers earn." A wave of pure joy crashed through the crowd watching the exam. People erupted, cheering Randall like he was a legend, stunned he'd pulled off an S rank even while living as a loner. Randall grinned, rubbing the back of his head as he stepped up to Lumines and thanked her, then admitted the guy didn't think he'd actually won. Lumines let out a little chuckle, saying it was true, and that he still needed 100 years of training to beat her, but then she went dead serious. The sacred sword had a premonition that this could all happen soon. Randall's eyes widened as the new skills slammed into him. Super reactions, super sensitivity, and the moment it hit, the necromancer knew he'd just leveled up hard with some deadly abilities. Right behind Randall, someone suddenly shouted his name. Nina sprinted over to him, and the second the guild worker got there, she blurted out her praise, congratulating him and calling him absolutely incredible. The girl said that it wasn't just his familiars getting stronger, Randall himself had grown too, and the poor guy kept stammering, still embarrassed, insisting he hadn't made much progress, but Randall knew it all came down to the skill Murren gave him, and then Nina, blushing hard, pushed back and declared, straight to his face, that yes, he really had gotten stronger. Lumens suddenly cut into the conversation, firing off a quick question, did Nina finish her work here? Nina grinned, thanked her warmly, and confirmed that was everything for today. Lumens shot her hand out to the boy and grinned like she'd just survived something epic, saying it was an amazing battle, and the girl laughed, swearing she'd gladly run it back again sometime. Randall practically beamed that this badass adventurer actually acknowledged him. Then the guy shot back, flashed his hand, and said he'd be totally down to meet up again sometime. This was the spark of a brand new bond between two top-tier adventurers, but the moment their views on the world clashed, that promise of a perfect team started to crumble. Randall grinned and said this fight was the perfect chance to get real, useful experience. Lumina snapped in agreement, and then she even pushed the necromancer to remember every chilling sensation he felt. Then the girl literally yanked herself away from their handshake, clambering up onto the exam field's fence, grinning as she swore she'd go have fun with the dragons and pray like crazy for the boy's success. Randall stared into Luminese's eyes, flashed her a warm, heartfelt smile, and told her it was totally mutual. Then she shot off in a quick dash, and the moment was gone. Myron bolted straight to Randall, panic blazing in her chest, and she told him right away. His hand looked awful, and they needed to fix it now. Even though Randall insisted the wound was shallow and he was fine, Myron snapped at him not to move, then thrust out her hand and yelled, "Night Lord." The girl kept directing her hands, pouring healing into Randall, and the shock hit the guy hard when she used her powers right in front of everyone. Then her vampire wings erupted. Murren whipped around and froze, wings were sprouting from her back. Nina snapped, panicked, "Hurry, follow me," and the girl yanked both of them by the collar, dragging them straight into the guild. As soon as they finally landed in a safe spot, Nina snapped and started yelling at Randall, accusing him of keeping her completely in the dark about Murren. Randall started to apologize, then admitted the truth. Myron really was a vampire, with a past so wild it chilled the room, and that's why the girl couldn't help feeling scared of everyone. Myron realized she'd messed up, and the shame hit her hard. while Randall kept soothing Nina, insisting he didn't want to turn a tiny molehill into a whole disaster. Nina started to desperately smooth over the whole mess and showed she understood, but Murren, standing right across from her, cut her off and snapped that she was leaving this place. Randall threw his hands out and snapped to Murren, because the guy had no clue what the girl was going on about, but the vampire leaned in and told the necromancer not to stress. She wasn't going to rope him into any trouble. Nina sprinted toward the girl, panic in her chest, demanding why she was leaving right now, only for Murren to snap back, furious, saying the question was dumb because Nina's being here was hurting everyone. Nina cut her off and told her, "No worries, I'm good in the guild," and Murren spun around in pure shock, completely lost on what the worker meant. Nina snapped straight to Randall, jabbing a finger at the guy as she said the real problem was totally different and way more dangerous because Randall had lied to the guild. The girl kept screaming that Randall should have known exactly what it feels like since he'd filed a false report, while the necromancer scrambled to apologize, swearing he was truly, desperately sorry. Still seething, Nina stormed to the door and snapped that since Randall understood everything, she had no choice but to report it all to the guildmaster. Then she told the girl to make sure everyone stayed put. Next, they all marched to the guildmaster's door. Nina cracked it open, slipped inside, and straight up apologized to the master for barging in. Nina leaned in toward the man in the chair, calling him Mr. Gillen, and announced she'd brought Randall, because the second that name hit the air again, the young man's surprise turned sharp and instant. Guildmaster Giller shot up from his chair and faced the boys, smiling as he told them they hadn't seen Randall in ages. Then the boy rushed to explain to Murren that he never thought Gillen would come back. Gillen closed the distance, stared right at Murren, and realized this was the girl from the exam. He dipped his head with respect, blurted out how happy he was to finally meet her, then introduced himself all over again. He figured Murren was some big-shot demon. Then Murren let out a wicked chuckle and told him, "Nah, you've got that diamond eye right," before confirming he was correct by revealing, "I'm a vampire lord." Jillian stared at Randall and told him she could tell the kid had pulled in someone important. Then she leaned in and asked if Randall was somehow connected to her. Randall started fumbling for the right words, but Myron cut in fast and declared that none of it mattered, because the only thing that truly mattered was that Randall was her friend. Gillen grinned at Randall and said, "Yeah, those signs clearly showed the kid had found a real friend," and Randall snapped his agreement right away. Then Gillen said, "There's one more thing." Randall didn't like how instantly serious the man got, and before he could react, the guildmaster dropped to one knee in front of him. Jillian's voice cracked with sadness as she told him how truly sorry she was, and then the man snapped that if he'd just been more capable, everything would have turned out worlds apart. Randall sprinted up to Gillen and shoved a hand out to pull him to his feet. Before the man could even start apologizing, the necromancer snapped, "Don't." Randall shot a worried glance at the man and demanded to know if everything would really be all right down the road, and whether their exam field disaster would bring any trouble later. Gillen pushed himself upright, cradling his knees, and snapped that Randall didn't have to fret. Thanks to Lord Cecilium, it wasn't a big deal at all. He even pointed out that Gillen must have been lucky when he turned down the hero's certificate for Fido earlier. Randall then demanded who this Lord Cecilium was, and Gillen answered flatly, the border guard who ruled the whole region. Gillen waved the boys down and said, "I've got more on Fido and the rest of them." The man swallowed his guilt and admitted he couldn't shut them down because they were S-rank. Gillen and Randall kept talking, and the moment they finally sat down, Myron's eyes snapped straight to the sweets. So irresistible they left the girl completely captivated. Randall finally started to understand what would hit his old team next. Zealand promised they'd be locked under house arrest, but that didn't stop Randall from obsessing over Loig, because Loig still had to be punished. So Randall inched closer to what punishment really meant, piece by piece, until the master made it clear he'd strip Loig of his license, and the knight wouldn't be able to go back to his order. Gillen kept apologizing, insisting the punishment he picked was practically nothing. Then he smirked, pointing out that it ended up being a perfect, convenient outcome for Randall. Randall, hungry to understand everything, pressed Gillen for what the master's words even meant, so Gillen took a sip of tea and said straight up it was like chopping off a lizard's tail. He took a few more sips, then tossed the cup back down, saying that Lord Cecilium and he had already decided they weren't going to give this matter much attention at all. Then Gillen snapped that Loig wasn't the only problem. The government helped drive this whole night on them, too, so the guys should have used the fact that everyone got demoted to a rank. Gillen finally said, "Now there are 3 of us in the crew, so good luck getting quests," and Murren just kept stuffing cookies into his mouth, totally ignoring the whole conversation. Jillian jumped right back into talking about Fathu, the A-rank knight already proving his worth, while his 2 girls in the party. They were so busted for their roles they could outshine even the best adventurers. Sure, they could hold the line as vanguard and support, but alone, they didn't have much power, and Zilin was dead serious. She couldn't imagine a single adventurer stepping in to help them right now. After the Randall incident, Nina fired back that those nasty rumors had spread like wildfire. Now people weaker than them kept their distance, terrified of getting close. Jolin said they had no choice left, and he figured they finally understood where they went wrong. Still, guilt hit him hard because he couldn't help but feel sorry. Then the man told the guys to hide their identities. Murren shrugged and said it wasn't a big deal, but Gillen pressed, was it because she was a vampire? He then shot back that it came down to the top brass and how they might take it the wrong way. Gillen stared at the adventurers and basically warned, I don't want you guys to cause any fresh trouble, because honestly, you've already got plenty of problems on your hands. Gillen grinned and said if she's okay calling herself human, then there's no reason to blow this up into a big drama, because honestly, I've got a good feeling about her. The moment the guildmaster said it, Randall whipped around to Myron and swore he meant every word, then told him the truth. Vampires aren't hated monsters anymore, because humans don't see them as hostile creatures anymore. Randall flashed her a warm smile and told Murren, now you can see it, every last person isn't the monsters you thought they were. Murren grinned right back and said, you're right. Zilin scratched his head and shot the boys a rushed apology for barging in, and right then the guildmaster struck a match, lit up, and told them it was finally time to get into the real reason they were here in the first place. Gillen told Randall that when he came back he'd have to finish a job, one that meant sneaking into the dragon graveyard to explore it. Randall didn't get what place they were talking about, at all, until Gillen kept talking, still puffing smoke, and insisted they had to dig into it and shut every last question about the location. Lord Cecilium had made it a personal request. Randall said he was honored, and Murren knew nothing about this place at all, so she grabbed the boys and grilled them. Gillen stared in shock. She'd never even heard of this cemetery before. Then the man leaned in and started talking and said that ages ago, a fearless warrior had slain a giant dragon. Up north in a jagged mountain wasteland where the monster's remains rested, people called it the dragon graveyard. Murren then leaned in and demanded to know why the dragon's bones were left there. Murren first chalked it up to the skeleton being way too huge or too heavy to handle, while Zilin snapped that the warrior's back then didn't even have the strength to beat something that powerful. So there was no chance of moving him. Those dragons were so massive that even if they ended one right then, the master still couldn't say they'd be able to haul his body. So the bones left behind didn't just sit there, they sank into the land, and the insane magic still trapped in their remains poisoned the air, wrecking the landscape with brutal, lasting damage. Gillen also called out those priests who used to show up with gifts, but now, straight up, they're stuck under house arrest. The moment the guild master brought up the exact punishment that wiped out his old group, Randall's eyes widened, because he instantly knew Gillen was talking about Quella. Gillen said this was exactly why he asked to bring the boys to his office, and he never thought it would turn into bad news for them. The master even warned them that no matter how hard they tried to cover up that Myron was a vampire, the group would sniff it out anyway, so the house arrest would at least keep those non-stop troublemakers quiet. Randall paused, then said, other than Quella, the holy disciple, there's probably no one better than me, and honestly, this is the perfect chance to show off my vampire powers. Randall thought it through, then admitted straight up that even with his detective skills, he couldn't promise the mission would be finished, and Zelen froze from the shock until Nina stepped in and declared, all right, it's time to tell the truth. Gillen knew this was the perfect time, so he folded his hands, leaned in toward Randall, and dropped his voice, begging Randall not to let a single soul know what the master was about to say. The guildmaster flat out told us the dragon graveyard is the only spot on their whole continent where you can actually rewind time, and that's exactly why it's legendary. Curiosity hit Randall hard, so the boy leaned in and blurted that the guild had found an anomaly hiding in the cemetery, and if that was real, then he already knew exactly where this investigation was headed. Gillen told them the guy was spot on. Now they had to drag Randall into it to tear down a zombie dragon, one of the biggest in history. Randall bellowed that the guild had to know how to take him down. Then Myron snapped in, warning it was way too risky and dead serious. After that, Murren flashed a grin and promised, we'll be fine, no trouble at all, and the girl chimed in that they were exaggerating the danger. Then Randall finally nodded along, declaring it would be an honor for them. Gillen grinned and swore he felt the quest was going to crush it, and the master chimed in that the guild should run things like normal, so they'd roll out with a detachment of swordsmen. Nina blurted out too, all smiles, telling everyone that Mr. Randall was going to be just fine. Then she insisted the guy had this incredible, one-of-a-kind job. Randall snapped in surprise when he heard how unique it was. Nina admitted she'd dug into necromancers, and found that right now, not a single adventurer in the guild was officially registered as one. Randall leaned in and demanded to know if his power was really that rare. Nina snapped back that it was, and that anyone with a unique profession always came with an exceptional gift. Nina wasted no time and blurted out examples: ability, demon king, and hero, then zoomed out even wider to include sages, saints, and limonies, the one who was here earlier. Randall kept doubting he could hold his ground around people like that, but Myron grabbed the guy's hand and told him, "If things turn into a fight, then we'll handle it together." Gillen backed it all up, and that guy's panic finally fizzled out, because the man declared that Randall now has serious allies, then grinned and admitted he's counting on Randall and Murren for real. Randall was freaking out, but there was nothing he could do about it. Everyone kept hyping the guy like he was a brand new shooting star, destined to leave his mark. He knew he couldn't betray that trust, not when the boy could still hold his head high and try not to be consumed by shame, and Randall swore he was in and would give it everything. Everything was set. Randall and Murren were about to leave, and once the guild cleared out, Mina and Jilin stood there to see them go, warning the boys to be extra careful in the cemetery. The travelers kicked off their journey, and once they'd gone just a few kilometers past the guild, Randall realized he'd barely noticed anything. Then the truth hit: Murren couldn't fly and move at the same time. She explained that short hops keep her magic from draining, but when the journey gets truly long, she'll save her power and just walk. After that, Murren snapped that she was already sick of living on the road, and Randall threw his support behind her before saying they should swing by the forest and make a pass. Murren dropped onto a rock and demanded to know how much farther they had left. Randall let out a breath and said they were almost halfway there, and then he added they'd make a stop in the city of Aden on the way. Murren said they'd better gear up for what's coming because this dragon isn't playing around, and just like that, she suddenly remembered something else. Myron plucked up the courage to corner Randall about sleeping dragons, graveyards, and how to send in a research request, and when the necromancer didn't shut her down, she dug even deeper into everything. The girl blinked in shock. Randall actually agreed. Then the guy launched into it, saying the research request wasn't about promises or hype, because the whole point was what they'd uncover once the investigation was underway. Oh, and one more thing: research requests are usually team jobs, and the payoff is almost nothing. There are two kinds of research, and the ones trusted the most get handed those assignments. Randall also revealed they'd been handed a special request, which meant they had to do everything perfectly or their reputation would take a hit. Murren nodded, then shook her head and told him she understood. As for the dragons, they were the kids' favorite fairytale by far, so loved, so hyped it was everywhere, and Randall couldn't shake the question of whether it matched their legend, the way everyone claimed. And none of that changes one brutal truth: dragons really did exist in the past, and every living thing once quaked in fear before their terrifying presence. Instead of torching villages, the dragon showed up once a year and rained down fresh dew for the people, but if they failed to guard it, or if the dragon didn't like what it saw, he'd warn them he'd unleash misfortune on the whole village. That's why everyone in town shook with fear of the dragon, and little by little, people started treating it like just another god. One day, that dragon suddenly craved a trip to a nearby empire, and because the people there didn't obey like the villagers, the dragon got crushed. Myron practically beamed as the girl insisted the heroes saved everyone. Then Randall snapped back that it wasn't that simple, because the empire brought the muscle, lots of people, one unstoppable dragon. Then the hero finally burst onto the scene, his name booming across the whole continent, and Murren paused mid-breath, realizing what she'd heard earlier didn't match what Randall was saying right now. Randall kept talking, calling that fearless hero a living legend of the village. Then he said they marched into the empire with a dragon and nearly wiped it off the map. Back in the village, the elders huddled up and decided the people would keep worshipping the dragon. Right when they did, the dragon's power of harmony surged to life. So that dragon, worshipped like a god in just one little village, got legendary overnight when he tore apart an empire the villagers feared, and when he finally died, the reverence only exploded even more. Myron's curiosity snapped to life as she demanded to know why the dragon died, and Randall fired back that one rumor says he'd hit his limit battling the empire, while another swears the locals killed him. Randall swore there's real magic in how dragons are described. Some get painted as loyal bodyguards, while others are drawn as vicious, teeth-baring terrors. People threw out theories nonstop, but one thing stays true: the dragon from the Empire tale is dead, because the only certainty is that those heroes were real. Randall shot his index finger up and promised the girl he'd show her what the cemetery looked like, then snapped in a tense voice that the place was deadly, thick with poisonous miasma. Adventurers have stumbled on demons lurking there, and others risk everything to grind medicine from the dragon's bones, because the miasma is so suffocatingly thick that the place feels as dark as a dungeon deep underground. And yeah, there were wild rumors that in this place anything could go down, which is exactly why the guild sent them here. Murren even admitted she finally understood what Jelen and Nina had meant. Murren shot up from the stone and snapped that if everything was really as Randall claimed, they had to move. Then the necromancer turned to the girl and demanded, "Are you okay?" Myron said the only way to know for sure was to go ask her, then flashed a grin and added, "And don't forget, we're not alone." Randall smiled right back like, "Yeah, you're spot on." After a couple more grueling hours on the road, Randall, Myron, and the two spirits finally rolled into Aden, the city Randall had pushed for, promising they'd get a real, comfortable night's rest. The city was buzzing with energy, crowded streets packed with every kind of soul, werewolves, elves, beastmen, and even sea creatures, all roaming side by side. All this sheer abundance left Murren completely rattled. He stared in shock as Randall soothed his Fenrir and told him he'd have to head back for a bit. He cradled the skill coffin for the dead, swallowed the spirit out of sight, and as he hid it, Murren's face snapped into view. Then he demanded, "What's wrong with you?" Murren shook her head and said she had no idea there were so many non-humans here. Randall grinned and told them, "Yeah, this city is full of surprises. So many different species live side by side that nobody discriminates, nobody persecutes, and everyone just gets to live in peace." The necromancer snapped his head toward Myron and asked the girl if she liked this lovely town. At least, that was the guy's opinion. Myron grinned and said she probably would, because this place was seriously amazing. Randall then told them to pause for a bit, grab supplies, and stuff their faces with a snack. Then his eyes snapped to Murren, and he asked if she'd be cool eating normal food. Myron burst out laughing and swore it was no big deal. Then the girl quickly cut in, insisting she didn't need food at all, calling it perfectly convenient. She claimed she doesn't eat like a normal monster, she feeds on cosmic energy instead, and that's why vampires are basically cousins to demons, because the one thing that refills their strength fastest is drinking human blood. Randall gave an awkward grin and admitted it looked like blood worked better. Then Murren burst out laughing, waved it off, and reminded him it wasn't the only way. Myron added, "I can pull magic elements straight from human food too, no need to waste time eating. I can skip the boring part and use that time to hunt down the magic element instead." Randall figured the girl didn't need to eat, but Murren snapped back that she never said that, because the girl insisted human food was totally fine, and she even loved the cookies. Those cookies were pure magic since Murren only needed one thing to power up. Randall burst out laughing, relieved that everything was lining up. The boys pushed forward, but just a few hours ago Randall's old team was still locked in their room, snapping and bickering again, right from Lloyd's move to start the fight. The night felt like it was sprinting through the rented room the group had taken over, so Fathu grabbed the guy and demanded what happened and where he was bolting to, and the guy said he already knew where Randall was headed next. Loic solemnly swore this place was a dragon graveyard, and Fido just stared at him, again and again, until the knight finally nodded, and Randall was already halfway in. Quella immediately blurted that they couldn't chase him at all, because they were still stuck under house arrest, and the girl was terrified of what would hit the group if the guild ever found out they'd left. Mail jumped into the discussion and snapped that if they kept pulling off this kind of move, they'd finally get a real shot to wipe the stain off their names and win back their reputations with everyone watching. Loig lifted a finger and shot the room a warning. Everyone was buzzing about the dragon graveyard, but that wasn't the whole story, while Gillen stayed silent, playing it cool to make the claim sound rock solid. Fathu just grinned and said this happens every year now, and honestly, if you're chasing a rush, hearing about zombie dragons is the perfect kind of madness. Mail started to insist that Loic couldn't have sprinted in here just to spread rumors, and the knight grinned back, saying this time everything was different. Lloyd started building up the words he'd been dying to say, and the knight warned him. If that dragon truly clawed its way back to life out of nowhere, the guild would still have to beg their saint, Quella, for help. Quella cita poi roi la indica ila la ci solo le più abater quel mostro. Quella china sabido la testa e si met a rimugener sul compagno di Randall. Logue closed the distance, draped his arm over Quella's shoulder, and started needling the saint, claiming she was scared, insisting it was just a zombie dragon, and warning that if they brushed it off, their country would spiral into disaster. Then he leaned in and promised that stopping it together would be the greatest honor. When Mail refused to back Loic's bravery, warning that this would all end in disaster, the knight swung his attention to the group's leader, Fido, and pressed him for his take on the whole plan. Fathu zoned out so hard he got dragged into both his latest memories and the ones from before, all while the sting of Randall always running past him kept gnawing at him. Fathu let his arms hang and perched on the edge of the bed, insisting the dragon probably wouldn't get reborn, yet if it did, they'd better pray they can get Quella to help. Loic kept bearing down on Quella, and she clenched her hands like she could will it into being. If she gave it everything, they'd all be saved, and after that, nobody would have to suffer again. Quella sucked in a breath, then confidently blurted that she'd do it if she had to. Right then Loeg shot up his hand and declared they'd march in and force the guild to take them back. As the crew cheered and geared up to head for the dragon graveyard, Jian stayed behind in his office and grilled his men with a fresh assignment, while one of them stared at the portrait and murmured that fate was finally handing him exactly what he deserved. A poster blared out a portrait of Like, screaming that the kid had been stripped of his heavy knight's license, and it wasn't just gossip, it was a full report sent straight to Lord Cecilium. Randall and Murren strolled through the city, and Murren looked around with pure awe, amazed at how packed it was, until Randall shot her a worried glance and asked if she was really okay, because he couldn't wrap his head around being in a crowd. She beamed back, saying that as long as nobody came at her with aggression, she'd be totally fine. She stepped right up, grabbed his hand, and locked eyes with him, smiling and saying, "If you're that worried, just hold my hand, we'll look like we belong, and everything's gonna be okay." Every boy stared at Randall like he'd just committed a crime, and then Mirren yanked his hand tight and sprinted down the street. Randall tried to stammer that she didn't have to rush since the food wouldn't run off. "Look," she chirped, beaming as she pointed ahead, and there it was, so tasty it practically dared him to taste it. Myron basked in pure euphoria in this new place, grinning at every person like it was magic, and Randall stared. Never once had he seen someone so thrilled by something as simple as food. So he said nothing, just followed her like, "All right, I'll go wherever she goes." The girl and the boy slid up to a counter packed with a gigantic fish, and Murren leaned in to quiz the boy right beside her, hanging on every detail. Then they ducked into a clothes store, and finally Murren and Randall hit the street vendors for snacks. Murren beamed at Randall, and the grin hit him like magic. He lit up right back at her, unable to resist matching her happiness. Myron and Randall rode on Ray straight into the dragon graveyard, and that careful wolf carried his master and his girlfriend like it was all business. Randall hopped off first, staring around in pure shock, while Myron's girlfriend lingered, not rushing at all. Then Myron grinned and told him, "We're here, this is the mountain where the dragon graveyard stands," and Randall finally admitted how deeply grateful he was to Ray for the ride. Renadal shut his eyes and awkwardly blurted, "I'm glad I made it here with Ray, I'll have to train my wings so I don't weigh her down." Murren stepped in, saying, "From what I saw earlier, you've already gotten the hang of it, you'll nail it soon." Renadal just hoped she was right. Myron, Randall, and Ray strode down the path to their destination, and Myron suddenly blurted that this place was pitch black. Turns out, it was even darker than last time. He even asked Tim in shock if he'd been here before, while Randall stared at the girl and demanded why the algae was growing so wildly. Murren snapped with confidence that those weren't just leftovers, they were the remains of a magical creature, and if they rotted too long, they usually turned undead, and then the girl fired right back with a new question. Why was the algae growing so wildly? Randall stammered out that there was a reason. He should have been given a real burial, not left to rot. Randall stared at Myron and blared, demanding to know what she was talking about when she said to hold back her power. Then he snapped that it made total sense why Jilin wanted them to do it. Myron shot back, saying the real magic was too dark, and they couldn't just leave it that way. Randall feared that if a demon or some adventurer stumbled in and forged a monster strong enough, it could somehow spiral into a demon king, so he kept his head and wouldn't leap to conclusions yet, while Murren insisted they had everything under control. Myron said the device pumps out healing air, but then it turns weak creatures into undead, and the girl swore it works shockingly well. She said it's possible because the dragon is burning through its magic, so Randall leaned in, watching the truth unfold. She's getting weaker while the device keeps getting stronger. Murren stared him down and said, "The closer you get to the flame, the warmer you'll feel," and the girl chimed in that it was the same rule. Randall nodded and snapped, "So there's nothing wrong with leaving him alone then." Myron warned, voice sharp, that if they didn't move now, she feared the moment would slip, and if they got even one thing wrong, this dragon would throw the whole delicate balance into chaos. Murren stared hard at the guy, because he just stared back in pure shock. The girl blurted out that the only way to beat him was to turn his own energy back on himself and strike him the instant he resurrects, guaranteed. Randall erupted in pure shock, screaming that it was impossible. The guy shot the question, any other options they could use. Myron let out a shaky breath and admitted she didn't know. The girl leaned in and asked straight up if they could resurrect the dragon at all. Randall hesitated, then said he wasn't sure, but he could at least try with this grimoire. The girl nodded like she finally got it. Myron leaned in and asked if he wanted that option. Then the guy's face went red and he blurted out, "No," at the top of his lungs. The girl snapped that they'd have to weaken him no matter what, and Murren shot back that if she killed the device with healing air, she could unleash it for real. She needed it to test the dragon's condition and keep herself safe from dragon addiction, so Randall finally cut in. It was time to start sorting everything out. Murren shrugged and said, "Yeah, I'm just as pumped as yesterday," and promised the guy he'd get used to it fast and learn to steady his confidence. So the guy blinked in shock and asked, "Wait, is that really true?" And Murren just nodded, "Yeah." The girl shot her hand up, ripped open a path ahead, and darkness curled around it. "Just walk through and you'll be there." Randall practically cheered, saying it was great, and the girl lit up with a grin, then promised they'd get it done in no time. They slipped into the tunnel the girl had carved, and the boy leaned close, telling her he could only hope she was right. They grabbed the lead and pushed ahead, then bam, a massive field opened up, and right in the middle lay a gigantic skeleton. Randall pointed and said, "So yeah, this is where we are." They inched closer to the skeleton as Murren insisted the restorative air level was fine, just there was a lot more of it right now, so Randall turned to the girl and demanded, "How long are we counting on?" The girl pressed her hand to the skull and warned, "If you don't look after it, the magic will fade in a few decades, maybe 100 years, and then we'll go right back to plain, normal life." Murren shot out the idea that maybe they should slap a ban on that whole area, and Randall lit up and said he was totally on board. Murren said it was time to make sure no other creatures lurked nearby. Randall grinned and promised he'd handle it, saying necromancy would wipe out the threat, and Murren snapped back that he was totally right. The girl shrieked that she was counting on him, and the guy shot back with a confident grin, promising he'd handle it. Randall's old crew stared from the bushes, and Loig blurted out, "What's this?" Then Rand fired back, "It's Fenrir," and Quella snapped, "Fenrir what?" The boy insisted it was a long-haired wolf, and Quella shrugged that its massive size was probably evolution at work, though yeah, some legendary tamers also boosted their pets to make them stronger. Loig snapped, "What nonsense, how could Randall be a legendary tamer when the visibility is still this bad?" Then he turned on Quella and demanded, "You're a saint, right? Can you fix this?" Father grumbled that they had no choice but to deal with the dragon. They'd go check on him. Loic snapped that he'd have to do it all again. Quella insisted everything felt totally different from before. Loic tore ahead and yelled at them to follow. No time to doubt. Quella snapped at him to stop, and Father let out a tired breath before dragging himself after them. Lily slapped his hand onto the device and swore they were getting down to business. Quella stared at him shell-shocked and demanded what he thought he was doing. Fedo roared that they were here to explore, and if the dragon showed up, they'd have to smash it before anyone else got a chance. It looked like it wouldn't return for decades, so there was nothing they could do about it, and Loig snapped back, asking if he even had a clue what they were about to endure. Loig snapped that yeah, they were here now because of Rand, and because of him their S-Rang crew was on the chopping block ready to get disbanded. Mail shot back that without Frigo, Loig couldn't even dream of becoming an adventurer. And then the boy erupted in fury, demanding she stop talking, because without a vanguard they wouldn't get anywhere fast. Father shot back that he understood everything, and the boy demanded, "So what do we do now?" Loig let out a bitter laugh and snapped that he knew too, because if it weren't for him, Father would still be stuck as a nobody. Mail insisted that if anyone knew a real shortcut to a level, Loeg was the one. Then he snapped that she just kept blurting junk and dodging the point, and Loeg boiled over with rage, yelling that they should wake him up and slice him into pieces. Father said they were out of options, and while Mail growled with sadness, he swallowed it down and stayed quiet. Quella stared at her friends in pure shock, then blasted out a screaming, "Stop," because no, they couldn't do this, they couldn't let that dragon wake up. Loic flashed a wicked grin and warned the girl that she really wouldn't want history to brand her as the most incompetent saint ever, the one who betrayed her own people with cold-blooded cruelty, and yeah, it might come to that. He said he was certain the sisters who raised her would be absolutely furious over what she did. Lloyd draped his hand on her shoulder and swore that there was no way they wouldn't beat the dragon and earn their hero name, while the boy shot back, or would it be smarter to lock in that miracle-working saint title the practical way? Quella couldn't stop thinking about her sisters and the little kids she watched over like family. The girl snapped that it was fine, she'd figured everything out and she was going to do it. Blue gave her a reassuring pat on the back and said it was fine, no need to panic, because hundreds of years have gone by and that dragon has nothing to fear. Father asked the girl if she could handle it, and Quella shot back with total confidence. Yeah, she'd figure it out, no problem at all. And yeah, Loig was right, it had been hundreds of years, and the girl even said she couldn't see him turning into some huge problem. Loig burst out laughing like, "Yes, that's exactly what I meant, but the damage was too brutal for him to bounce back that fast." Quella pressed the cross to her forehead and burst into prayer. Black smoke burst out from the device wrapped around the dragon's skeleton. Loig leaned in and asked, "So how long will it take?" The girl shot back that it would eat up almost the entire time. Quella si rialzò dal suolo, sorridendo, descendo ci adesso andava tutto bene, ma il fumo iniziò a sgordato sempre più forte, e la ragazza perse il controllo. Lloyd urlò in faxia a tutti cosa fa successo. Male si misi a striller ci avevano preso il controllo. Fido esbado ci elevano interrata. E Lloyd furioso, ringhio ci sperava davvero ci il drago fosse tornato. The girl shrieked that yes, Quella's face twisted in horror. She had never guessed a powerful mage was lurking nearby. She even flashed back to Randall's friend and wondered just how strong she could be, while Fido screamed like he'd lost his mind, demanding that if anyone else besides Rand was here, they'd better stop hiding and then get out now. The heroes faced off across the battlefield, locked eyes like the next move would decide everything. Mael snapped out her wand and declared it was time to vanish, then swore she'd wipe every trace clean, and together they had to bolt before anything caught up. Loeg barked, "This is exactly what I meant," and slammed the idea down. If they want it, they can do anything. Now they just have to scramble out of here while they still can. They bolted into the chaos. Fathu even shouted something about the dragon. Loeg demanded Rand stay close, so why not smash him while he's lying there? Dragons have powers like that. Quella snapped back that she reckoned Rand could handle the threat alone. Loeg seethed and growled that then everything would finally be fine. Every face snapped toward him with pure horror, but nobody dared to speak. Then they bolted out of the forest. Murren stared into the forest like it was speaking secrets, and Randall practically burst with excitement. What's happening? She didn't even reply, then she bolted. The boy spread his wings and shot after her, wondering if he could finally close the distance. Murren and Randall crashed down right beside the device. The girls snapped that they'd bolted. Randall blurted, stunned, "Wait, you mean you ran away?" But then he had to ask, "Who are you talking about?" Marin snapped that the device was acting weird, so she shot in to inspect it. Then poof, there was no sign of them anywhere. The guy went red with rage and demanded who they were and what on earth she thought she was talking about. Randall let out a shaky breath and said, "All right, does the dragon's body look all right now?" He pressed about the device. If it was broken, that healing energy might not be flowing right. Murren snapped back that, yeah, that mattered more than anything, and they should turn around and check. Then the girl stepped in closer to the skeleton. Randall told Murren she had to dig up the dragon's research, and she shot back, "Fine." The girl leaned in and studied that massive skeleton inch by inch. The corpse was already soaking up way too much healing energy, and the dragon had started to twitch back to life. Its final awakening was basically ticking down. Randall leaned in and asked what they could do. She snapped that they had to shrink it, so when it waking up, the guy pressed. Murren said, "Give it a few minutes." Randall said it looked like they wouldn't have time to put together a strike team, and the girls shot back with total confidence that they'd have to take him down themselves. Randall shot a tired look at them and demanded to know if they could actually pull off a win. Myron shot her hand out toward him and told him they didn't have to beat him, and the boy's eyes widened as he blurted, "What do you mean?" Murren snapped at him to check his own condition, because once he's resurrected, he won't last long, so Randall shot back, "Wait, what do you mean I can't be left alone?" The girls snapped back that they only had half an hour. His power would barely dent the nearby city, and only if it was pushed to the limit. Randall roared that they couldn't let that happen. Of course, Murren agreed, because if his body got destroyed, he'd be trapped in the world as nothing but a spirit. That's when his moment finally hit. Then the guy blurts, stunned, "What do you mean?" The girl grins wide and answers, "Necromancy," and before he can even react, she asks if this isn't a good time. A brutal roar shattered the air, and Randall swore it all started right then. The birds started peeling out of the forest, and Murren blared, "You've got 30 minutes. Their mission was simple, keep him busy for the whole countdown. He shot back that he got it loud and clear. A massive dragon suddenly roared into view right in front of them. The girls erupted into loud screams, saying they were finally starting. The monster tore through the air with a blood-chilling roar that shook everything. The dragon let out a thunderous roar that rattled the earth, and Randall gasped in shock, "A zombie dragon," while Murren stared in pure horror. The dragon slammed down onto the ground, then strode straight toward them, like it owned the whole place. The monster was a walking wreck, wounds everywhere, and jagged bones thrusting out like it was never meant to survive. The dragon hoisted one mighty paw up high, and razor-sharp claws gleamed from the tips. Murren roared at Rand to dodge, like the next second could shatter everything. The dragon stretched a clawed paw straight toward the boy. The girl screamed his name, begging him to get clear of the attack, and Randall froze in sheer shock. Something was terribly wrong with his body. He's frozen in place, unable to move a single step. Ray and Ace stood before their master and surged into the attack, piling hit after hit until the monster finally cracked. like the dragon's own paws rose, and its roar turned into a howl of pain. Ray and Ace locked eyes with their master, grinning hard, because they had finally managed to help. Randall broke into a grateful smile and told them, voice steady, that he couldn't thank them enough, because they literally saved his life. The dragon snapped its eyes on them with pure rage, growling like thunder, furious it got attacked. It slammed a hit at Randall, but he slipped away just in time, and the guy actually thought, this time I dodged it. Randall snapped at the girl, furious that his own body wouldn't listen, then demanded what in the world was going on. Murren shot back that the dragon's intimidation was the reason, warning him to keep his eyes on it during the attack because it could lock him down so he couldn't move. Randall just said, it's fine. The girl shot forward and zoomed straight at the dragon, screaming in fury that the monster didn't just have strong magic. He was going to take it from her and get it stolen for good. Murren slammed a massive black ball into existence, hurled it straight at the dragon, and screamed, begging it to swallow. Boom! Its roar tore through the air as the hit crippled it, and Murren's brutal power left the monster truly wounded. Randall stared in stunned disbelief that it actually worked, while Murren snapped at him to stay calm, because the dragon was already up, coiled, and ready to strike again. He flicked his tail, then they still rocketed out of the way at the last second. Myra snapped that they were making him furious, then told Randall they had to burn through his magic supply so she'd try a spell attack. Randall blinked in shock as Myra slammed into the dragon again, admitting she didn't know if it would work, while Randall insisted she had to be sure. Murren slammed another punch into the dragon, and it shrieked like it was dying, while the girl snapped at her friend to finally shut up. The boy couldn't shake the gut feeling that he was just in the way, and then the dragon blasted his jaws wide to swallow Myron. She screamed, grinning like, go on, try it. She jammed a glowing magic ball straight into his mouth, like she meant business. The dragon staggered, let out a low growl, then spun around and started striding off as Myron watched it walk away. Randall blurted in pure shock that she was running away. Murren snapped back that she thought she'd gone a little too far, and Randall, trembling, screamed that she really had gone a little too far. The boys stared as dark clouds piled up over the dragon, and Randall burst out, yelling that he was summoning thunder and lightning. Lightning blasted the dragon out of nowhere, and he let out a bone-shaking scream. The guy bragged that thunder and lightning were part of the great sage's magic, and Myron beamed like she'd hit the jackpot. Then the monster snapped with fury and charged straight for them, while the girl yelled that they'd fight like adults. Randall stared in shock, asking what she meant, because he'd been holding back this whole time. Murren snapped back that he'd never burn his magic like that. Myron met the monster with a fierce glare and warned her friend that it was striking again, while Randall lurked right behind her, stunned by what he was seeing. He couldn't wrap his head around what would happen next, because that dragon didn't just get mad, it burned hotter once some girl dared to hurt him like that. Randall's mind reeled in terror as he realized, with full shock, that he was about to attack again. The dragon's darkness cracked as beams of light tore into the world. The dragon froze for a split second, then beams of light blasted the ground, scorching everything they touched. Randall and Murren scrambled to dodge, but the sky wouldn't stop raining attacks, and every move felt one step too slow. A shriek tore through the air, loud enough that everyone in the forest froze in terror, because something awful must have happened. Randall shot his friend a stunned look, asking how anyone could have even been out there. Before he could finish, Murren zipped past and snapped back, irritated that this was not the moment to worry about strangers in the trees. Randall snapped, what kind of attack is that? The girl didn't even look away from the dragon as she said, it's called the breath of death, and it kills instantly. Then the dragon gaped its mouth wide, fire drops started raining out. He was lining up another crushing attack to wipe out Randall and Myron. Then the girl snapped to her friend and yelled for him to dodge, and Randall froze in stunned disbelief as the dragon unleashed a blazing fiery vortex. The boy stared as the flames charged straight for him, panic screaming that he didn't have time to bend, and that turning into the Night King wouldn't save him either. Randall kept talking to himself, fuming that he couldn't do a thing. With the end already in his hands, the boy gave up and said, that's it, I'm dying now. Myron burst in front of them and threw her body between him and danger, shielding him at the cost of her own life, and the boy hated that because he'd already resigned himself to dying. She just smiled, met his eyes, and swore she'd stay with him until the end of his days, insisting they hadn't even tried enough yet, and she would not let him die here. Randall fretted and asked his friend if she was all right, and the girl jerked her chin toward the dragon, shouting for him to look. The dragon sat on the ground and blasted smoke from its mouth like it was running on fumes. Murren swallowed hard and whispered that it looked like it had spent every last drop of magic. The hero opened his mouth to say something, but time was already up. The girl cut him off mid-sentence and blurted, fearless and loud, that this was the moment to strike. Then she spun a magic ball into existence and declared she had to clear the path for the Night King, so there was no time to waste. Randall fired back with a confident, "Good, let's do it." The boys sprinted straight at the dragon, and right then Murren and Randall hurled a spell together, yelling that they were about to unleash the Night King to take it down. A sinister black ball of magic started to coil around the dragon, swallowing it piece by piece. First black magic wrapped its wings, then it crawled over the rest of its body. An explosion ripped the air and the dragon bellowed in agony, like it couldn't even stand the pain. But the moment it said, "We did it," he was already drained, too exhausted to fight or struggle. The dragon vanished in a blink, and then out of nowhere, bats surged into the sky like a living storm. A thunderous blast ripped through everything, and the dragon was erased from existence, while Myron and Randall one stood there, stunned, with nothing left in its place. The guy beamed that everything was just great, then Murren grinned at her friend, saying they finally pulled it off together like they did it. Randall's nerves instantly flared as he insisted no, that wasn't right because it was mostly her. Thanks to her, they beat the dragon, and the girl just let out a breath and snapped back, only for now. "What?" The guy blurted out, all fired up, asking if she was okay and not hurt. Murren broke into a grin and taunted, "So who do you think you're fooling?" The girl snapped her fingers and cast a spell, claiming she'd called on the King of the Night. Then black magic surged around her, sealing every scratch and wound in an instant. Murren's glow flared as she laughed, "I'm back." Perfectly healed and ready to charge into battle again, while Randall just stood there, awkwardly blinking like, "Yeah, you really know how to catch me off guard." The girl told him to stop messing around and dive into necromancy right now. He nodded. "Yeah, that's it," and Randall yanked open the book, slammed his hand on it, and shouted for the dead to rise. Marin leaned in, eyes sharp, asking what the heck was going on and whether everything was actually going to work out. Then Randall shot back with total confidence that everything was just fine. Right in front of them sat a dragon that looked unstoppable, like pure life and power. The ancient dragon Great Calamity had finally been resurrected, and it was alive and ready to be used. Murren screamed with joy, "This is incredible." And then it worked, no doubts, no failures. Myron said with total confidence, "It's a real young dragon now." Randall's jaw dropped as he blurted, "What dragon is this?" The guy grinned and swore the thing would be bigger than the wyverns they're used to riding. Randall leaned in, asking if Great Disaster was really his name. "Right." The girl nodded like it was obvious, and Randall muttered that if that's what he was called back then, maybe he'd want a fresh name now. The dragon growled right along, like it agreed. Randall said, "Yeah, that's fine," and closed the distance to the dragon. Then he demanded, "What about Earl?" The dragon's eyes snapped wide with shock. Hurla purred in approval, and he leaned over to Randall and wrapped him up in a hug. The boy grinned as he petted him, and Murren laughed, saying he clearly liked the name. Earl Great Calamity just got a fresh power-up. His rare skill is *** champion of the Night King ***, and he's also been handed Dragon's Blessing *** and Dragon Fight ***, plus Dragon's Breath *** to seal the deal. The girl leaned in, practically begging the guy to tell her if he'd learned any skills, and Randall flipped open the book. "Yeah, 1 special ability plus 3 more. Then he went, "I've got another unique skill too," and the guy started to look downright monstrous. Myron snapped, raging that it was outright rude. She demanded there was plenty of space, then said, "Why not practice a bit?" Randall snapped, "That's a great idea." The boy blasted out a loud shout at Earl to get ready. Then the monster purred, pleased as ever. Murren grinned at the boy, sure he was getting stronger, while Randall bounced over to Earl and yelled that everything was fine, so he should just keep going. The boy let his friend do exactly what he wanted, and Murren kept reasoning that she was growing stronger with him, because Randall was full of surprises. The sun was already bleeding into the horizon when Randall dropped onto the ground, dead tired, and called it a break. Then Murren's eyes lit up, because right then, that girl was floating in the air. She leaned in all curious and asked her friend how many unique skills he already had, and Randall shot back, 4. Murren went wide-eyed like she couldn't believe it, asking in shock again, "You've got 4 skills." She snapped that if someone even has 1, they're already counted among the strongest beings, and then Randall scratched his head, asking awkwardly, "Is that really true?" Only for Murren to blow up, furious, demanding, "Do you not understand anything at all?" "What?" The girl leaned in and said those unique skills mattered, only if he knew how to wield them. Then she added they weren't meant for some specific job, but more like personal symbols, and Randall snapped, "So what does that even mean?" Myron shot back that this Dark Lord wasn't some stranger at all. It matched her Night King perfectly, and once sunset hit, everything that followed got reshaped by it. The girl shrieked in rage, and the explanation tangled in knots. Randall could only think awkwardly that he hadn't understood a single thing. He asked her to paint him a picture later, so he could see firsthand what she could do right now. Myron grinned and said it was a great question. Then her dark magic surged, and she revealed she could now seize the enemy's magic, turning the incoming wave of air into a dead stop. The boy stared at her in stunned disbelief and asked again. Randall blared out, asking how her last words meant he could mess with anyone else's magic, and Mari just admitted she'd said that, so Randall froze in shock, unable to believe it. The girl nodded and said he had to be skilled, because one wrong move could get him seriously hurt. The guy kept pushing the logic. For now, she wouldn't be able to take control of opponents who were more advanced in magic. But hey, right now, that power is basically just a magical boost. Myron leaned in and asked what skills he'd picked up, and the guy yanked out a book like, "All right, I'm showing you right now." He started ticking off every skill he had, and the girl blurted out, awkwardly, asking how many there were. Randall said the big difference was clear. Once the recovery kicked in, the food repairs boosted nutrition, and the blood healed right alongside it. The girl stared at Randall and blurted out that she had blood restoration too, like it might actually help him. Maybe not, though, and Randall just nodded and said, "Yeah, that's how it works." Murren leaned in and asked if he still refused to start drinking blood. Then the guy stammered, awkward as ever, and admitted that he still didn't. Randall asked if food recovery could boost the nutrition, and the girl nodded like it was no big deal. If he got enhanced, he'd heal up and grow stronger just by eating. Randall immediately pictured himself getting ridiculously fat and scarfing food nonstop, then awkwardly blurted out that it wasn't exactly the best scenario. Myron leaned in, eyes wide, and asked her friend what other skills he'd been hiding: super strength, lightning-fast reactions, and a super sense, plus white flame, scorching lightning, black wings, a huge dark magic boost, and blood regeneration. Then came the dragon's blessing, a full-on dragon fight and a dragon breath that tore through the air, and Myron still couldn't believe it. He had more power than she did. He only cares about the names anyway, let them brag about dragon skills. Myron's the one who will break it down. First comes Dragon Blessing, a defensive skill that shields him from both cold and heat, and then Dragon Fight, a stronger version of intimidation that actually proves useful. Murren explained that Dragon's Breath upgrades everything at once, so now he can unleash attacks using all of his attributes in the same breath. Randall froze in shock as he saw the white flame and lightning supercharged by the dragon's breath, and he couldn't believe how insanely good it looked. "Those skills are legit," Murren shot back with a grin, basically confirming he was the real monster he claimed to be. Randall burst into frantic arm-waving and yelled, "No way, there's no way it can be true." Murren turned to leave, saying they were done and it was time to go home. Randall snapped, "Wait." Then he demanded why they couldn't keep the fun going in the next village, and with zero hesitation, he answered his own question, "We can." The girl trailed behind him, then peeked from the shadow of his back, and Randall demanded to know what happened. She swallowed hard and said she was begging for forgiveness, and he snapped, shocked, asking what on earth she was apologizing for. Murren shot him a furious look, upset that she'd pushed too far in her dragon fight. Then she said that if anyone laid eyes on her, they'd judge her for it, and as Randall remembered the way she fought, the whole thing finally clicked. Murren gasped in terror, shaking as she admitted she was absolutely terrified. Randall figured, of course, she was scared, because if he'd been in her shoes, even he would have been shaking with terror. The boy grabbed Murren's shoulders and with a bold grin said he wanted to know what people had done to her, if she didn't mind, of course, and Randall leaned in, asking what she'd tell him. Myron stared at him wide-eyed, then dropped her gaze and told him, "It's totally fine." She's about to lay it all on the table for him, no secrets left. Murren revealed she was the sole heir of a royal vampire bloodline. Then, right after she was born, a vampire hunt erupted and turned everything into a battlefield. Randall stared at her stunned because the guy barked at her to stop. She shot back that nobody around her died during her walk. Then the girl stumbled out, awkward as could be, that she was too young to remember every moment. Murren snapped that she was telling it right now, she'd read it in a book. Randall nodded like, "Yeah, that part's clear," but then he stopped in it. He was stunned out of his mind, convinced her parents had already died, until the girl cut in with a bright smile and told him, like it was no big deal, "By the way, they're alive." After that day's shock hit, they probably scattered and left her behind, and Murren went on to say this. There was no record at all of anyone vampire hunters ever captured or killed. Randall said that if they were still alive, they'd be losing their minds with worry over her. Myron smiled through the sadness and admitted she had no clue where they even were, or what they were doing right now, and honestly, I feel like there's a very good reason they can't find her or get in touch. Randall demanded to know where they were, and she just smiled, like she had no clue either, except she was certain they were miles from home. The guy leaned in and asked if she was really offended, or if it was something else altogether. Murren shot back that they didn't even measure life in lifespan, and that the parent-child bond just wasn't as tight as it is for humans. She grew up ignored and left to fend for herself. so no wonder her relationship with her parents never quite warmed up. The girl choked out, heartbroken that they'd tried to kill her even as an infant. They locked her inside her room, then the seal held long enough for her to survive. Randall demanded to know who it could be, and Murren snapped that she didn't have a clue, but one thing was certain: they needed her alive. She was stuck in a room stocked with food and clothes and everything anyone could want, except the toys were swapped out for giant, packed bookshelves. At least she was safe in there, so the guy figured the magic had to be insane. He reasoned that if he were human, he'd be a sage, and if a demon had trapped her, he'd be one of the 4 heavenly kings. Randall then leaned in and demanded what was inside those books. Myron shot back that they were basically history books, packed with every tragedy her country had ever lived through, and the whole damn history of this world. In every single one they painted people as the deadliest threat, so when the girl said that, you could hear it in her voice. That's why she's terrified of them. Randall stared at her, seething over what they'd done, snatching her parents and burning her homeland to the ground. And then he added that every bit of Murren's knowledge beyond what she'd lived through came straight from books. Randall told her straight to her face that being scared of people made perfect sense. He asked her straight up if he was the first person she'd ever truly believed in, and Myron awkwardly blurted that yeah, he was human, but something about his scent felt weirdly familiar. Randall swore he wanted to wipe fear off people's hearts, but how in the world was he supposed to do that? Randall told her to treat it as the first step, and he warned her that the knowledge she'd learned from books didn't matter anymore. The girl stared at him stunned, while the guy shrugged and said that the great age of vampire hunting was long gone, and back then, people didn't treat vampires like monsters. Murren hesitated for a second, then finally admitted, "Yeah, I did." The hero stared at the girl in total silence, like his words were trapped behind his teeth. Randall snatched her hand and bolted forward, screaming that it was always better to see things with his own eyes than to believe a single word. "She needs to stop stressing, trust me, it's all going to work out." The girl said, "Yeah, I'm good," and then she and her friend tore through the forest together, sprinting like they were chasing daylight. They stormed back into the village, and Randall shot a look over his shoulder at the girl cowering behind him. "We're here." The moment the villagers spotted them, they erupted, screaming, "The heroes are back." The man blurted, "It's them," and his friend instantly bowed, thanking them again and again, so grateful it practically spilled off him. Randall leaned in and grilled the girl about what, exactly, had her so shocked. Myron barked at the guy, totally stunned. Then she blurted that she'd figured everyone would scatter the second they saw her face, until the village elder Zig stepped out and said how deeply grateful he was to them. The man kept insisting, swearing on his own eyes that he'd seen them wipe out the zombie dragon. Then Murren shot him a stunned look and demanded what he thought he was watching them for. Randall confirmed that yeah, the guild was guarding the dragon graveyard right now, but for generations that job originally belonged to their village. Then Sieg cut in, saying they couldn't promise enough help since they were knee-deep in festival prep, but he'd be truly grateful if they pitched in. Myron gasped, shocked she couldn't believe they accepted her so easily after watching her fight, and Randall just smiled and told her, "Everything's fine, I've got you." The girl grinned ear to ear and shouted, "Yes," like it was the best news in the world. Randall kept his eyes on that girl all evening, convinced her heart was warming to the kindness she'd just been shown, and he started to believe that with time, Myron would finally stop fearing people. He honestly prays that it's true. Right then, Randall's old team was still trapped in the forest. Vado spotted Loig sprawled on the ground, soaked in blood, and the guy screamed, "What happened?" He started shaking Loeg, yelling at him to wake up, and reminding everyone that he was the one who brought them here. Then Quella burst in, sprinted right up to them, and screamed at Fido to not touch Loeg. She tried that spell again and again. Each time, it fizzled out like it was laughing at her. The man stayed out cold, completely unconscious. Quella watched as Male stepped up and shut it down, saying it wouldn't do a thing. The zombie dragon was far too powerful. It was already too late, and she shouldn't waste another drop of strength. Quella stared back at her friend, terrified. Father slammed his fist into the stone and snapped, demanding to know why, his rage spilling through every word. He swore he saw a zombie dragon rise from the dead. Panic slammed into them so hard it felt like their souls were about to break. With nothing left to lose, they bolted, pure escape mode. Father leaned in and demanded how Rand was supposed to survive a monster like that. He figured they'd slipped away, but Rand didn't. He stayed right there, built like a beast and sharp in his mind, and that meant they'd truly lost. Male demanded Father's plan. Father snapped into hysterics, screaming that what were they supposed to do now that the monster they were meant to face had vanished. If Rand hadn't stepped in, that thing would have torn them apart without mercy, and even Quella had to bark at him to finally calm down. The hero's body went rigid with pure horror. Father was convinced he'd never beat Rand. He yanked at his head and snapped that everything he'd done was just chasing Rand's shadow. Then he turned to his friends and screamed that they figured it all out. He tried everything to shut Rand down as a leader, but the guy with tears streaming down his face screamed that Rand was stronger than him, straight up. He kept screaming that they'd been mocking him the whole time, and Fado snapped, asking what the point was of humiliating him, while Quella roared at the top of her lungs for him to finally calm down. Fado snatched his sword and declared it was finished, then Quella burst out, laughing with excitement, asking what they should do next. Fado jabbed his sword at Lo's body, roared that it was all his fault, and kept screaming as Quella begged him to stop in pure terror, only for Fado to bark, "Shut up," and slammed down with everything he had, chopping Lo's head clean off so it popped away like it was nothing. Veda stared at everything he'd done, completely stunned. He stared at his hands, trembling as he said, "I killed him," and then a man sprinted up, screaming at him to calm down. The girl insisted Loiga would have died anyway because he didn't kill him. Mail said it with absolute confidence, grinning like she'd just cracked the whole thing, because now she finally had an idea. Her friends leaned in, eyes locked on her, curious and bright. Fadu immediately shot off, "So what's the plan?" And Mail couldn't stop remembering Murren and Randall's happy faces. She stared her comrades in the eyes and screamed, pure fury spilling out, that she was going to kill Rand. Fadu gasped in shock and blurted that she wanted to kill Rand, and when he stepped closer, Rand demanded she really meant it. She said they'd go on and commit another crime, and honestly, the way this girl is acting, it's clear she's a vampire. Quelli fido spalancorono glai acai, increduli, se una vampira, I mascai canis guardi duri, desero chi era esitament il suo piano. The girl shouted that the vampire who zombified the dragon then fled was going to be hunted down. She swore they'd kill him, kill Rand, and even sell the vampire to a powerful organization that would haul her in, shut her down, and lock her away. Fido blurted in shock, asking how the Sorcerer Association male could sound so sure. Then the girl admitted, straight-faced, that yes, she did have ties to those organizations, and added that the Sorcerer Association is especially touchy about vampires. Quella demanded to know what Tyre was whispering about Myril, the legendary vampire hunter, because the rumors about her aren't just annoying, they're downright dark. Mail shot back that the Sorcerer's Society, no, Myril, still had her sights set on hunting vampires, and Myril only needed one thing: information, plain and simple, and the Spado just said it was obvious. The guy demanded, "So what about Log?" And Fadu snapped back in fury that only they could bring him to justice, right now if they had to. Mail stared at her dead friend and said, straight through the pain, he had no choice. She could feel it, so many people were panicking over his fate, genuinely, from the bottom of their hearts, and Quella swore it was the truth. Mail leaned in and asked, "So what happens if Log steps out of the adventurers' ranks?" Quella said Mr. Loig probably wouldn't come back to the order, and Fadat agreed. After everything he'd done, he figured the Knights would want no part of them now, while Loig himself made it clear he had zero plans to sign up for a permanent job. Quella swore that in another life he'd have turned into a bandit or joined some foreign army, and Mail just smirked, because either way, he still would have been the Order's sworn enemy. The girl snapped that he was a stain on the Order's history, so they needed him gone. Then she pushed that she should be the one to finish him off, but Quella refused and said she'd never do it. If Loic fought for another country or got famous as a robber, it would bring the Order even more shame. They'd gladly kill Log, wipe it from the record, and pretend it never happened. Mail just warned them it'd get messy fast. Now they're holding a trump card and gearing up for a face-to-face with the Order, because they had a plan all along. And the girl presses on. Now there are two organizations that hate vampires, and they can slam the guilds with pressure. Quella couldn't stop them, no one in that order dared say no, and the Mail only pushed it harder. She was sure the church didn't exactly love vampires either. Quella agreed, but Mail shoved in and told her there was no choice left now. Everyone stared at each other, tense as steel. Mail said they could only come back after the job was done. Quella shook her head and admitted she had no clue, and the whole thing felt downright weird. Mail warned them that if they came back, punishment would hit them hard, and Quella gasped in horror, scared they wouldn't just be punished, they'd be killed. Fido snapped, "Fine, yeah, we'll do it," and Mayo jammed her wand under Loig's chin to lift his head. "I'll take his head," she said, then Fido seethed, demanding, "Why, where are we even going?" The girl shot back to Morel. "That's where we've got to go first." Murren and Randolph finally came back, and the girl beamed like she'd waited forever, until Randolph snapped, "We hit the guild first." So they strode inside. Jillian burst up to them with a grin, shouting that they were finally back, and that they'd absolutely killed it. Randall whipped his gaze around the room, like he was hunting for the next threat. He asked if there were more adventurers in this place than usual. Murren smiled and said, "You know there's a reason for that," and the boy immediately gasped. Randall then wondered whether the guild had finally gotten the message about the zombie dragon awakening. Gillen said either way. Every guild worker, yes, even Gillen, dropped into a deep bow to Murren and Randall, and the man blared, "I can't thank you enough," speaking for the whole guild. Randall stammered a shaky no, like we didn't do anything, but Gillen slid an arm around his shoulders and practically urged him to stop being modest, swearing their achievements would be remembered forever, so they'd better take the congratulations. A guy named Murren showed up and the girl blurted, all excited, "What's wrong?" But the man just smiled and said, "You helped us a ton, thank you." Gillen couldn't shake the guilt that their first order turned into a nightmare, and he kept insisting. If they'd failed, everyone here would have been hunted down with them, and there was no guarantee any of them would have come back alive, so yeah, they'd better thank them. At first, Myron was mortified, but then she erupted into loud laughter, her cheeks flaring as she insisted they shouldn't thank him. It was nothing. Gillen grinned and said she'd already spoken like a real hero. Myron froze in shock and blurted, "A hero," then snapped back, shouting with full confidence, "Yeah, he's right, no doubt about it." Gillen grinned and said they were finally cleared to recheck the ranking, both of them. He said that once the job was done and the dragon was dead, he'd let them all have a special promotion, Randall and his crew included, so when the words hit the air, the crowd exploded with cheers. They kept screaming that everyone was getting boosted to A rank immediately. Yeah, they wanted it, and they'd gamble on it. Then the guy went, "So what can you possibly do against Zombie Dragon?" One of them snapped back, "You'll drop dead on the spot." And Zelen blared that Murren and Rand would be next too, because with their two-person team, they were the easiest target. He hands them an S rank and the crowd explodes like they just won the lottery. These two are teaming up, no Fritos in sight, and people are screaming, whatever this is. It's absolute insanity, and then boom, another S group shows up right here. Myron snagged the guy's attention right away, and Randall demanded to know what was going on, while the girl stammered, hands shaking, that it was good, like she was trying to convince even herself. Randall flashed a grin, of course, of course. Myron caught his joy in the air and grinned so hard it lit up her face. Then she blurted, "Yes." Jillian draped an arm over the guy's shoulders and told him they dragged all these people here and geared up to help with the zombie dragons, so leaving anyone empty-handed would be unforgivable, right? The man nodded and said, yeah, he understood. Murren let out a happy cry, thrilled that everything was good, and the girls snapped that they'd go all out and celebrate after that. Jillian just grinned and agreed it was the perfect call. He whipped around to all the boys and roared that they were gonna make a ton of noise today. Myron dug into some seriously delicious food and chatted with everyone around her, and Randall watched his friend with a grin, like, yeah, she'd already clicked with people and was straight up having the time of her life. Gillen eyed the guy like, "So how are you holding up now?" And the man grinned, claiming he was their hero today, though Gillen could practically tell he didn't think an old man like him had anything worth hearing. Randall snapped, "What do you mean?" The man claimed he'd hunted everyone down and pulled the whole group together, and he even thanked Randall for it. Randall shot back that it was just an accident, but Gillen shrugged, he did it anyway. What? The boy said he was really grateful, but the man shot back that there was nothing to thank. Then Randall whipped his finger toward the crowd and demanded to know what he decided to pretend this was, a goodwill gesture from the guild. Gillen snapped back that he was the strange one, then pushed the boy to stay on guard with everyone. Only the kid couldn't miss the irony, since that same man had betrayed his people and paid for it with a scar he'd earned on the street, and Randall cut in, telling him straight up that he didn't get to lecture him about it. Gillen snapped that it wasn't all on him, because the vampire's bad reputation runs way deeper than anyone's suspects, and the scary part, those adventurers from back then might still be alive, especially since they weren't all human. Randall bragged that thanks to him, hardly anyone in the guild cared, so Gillen just smirked and said, "Perfect, now's the time." Randall leaned in and asked what was going on, and Gillen snapped back that Fatto and 3 others had vanished from their own sight. Randall snapped out excitedly, "It's all on me, sorry. I can't control the S-Ring groups, so don't stress." Gillen snapped back in rage, "Fine, so be it," but deep down he knew exactly what would happen if they brushed off his demand to stand down, and the idea that they'd listen was just plain foolish. Randall stared him down and demanded, "So what's the plan?" Zillen snapped back that they were launching a search party, because there had to be a real goal in this, and if they were lucky, they'd drag something back like a trophy. He kept insisting the villagers they'd saved from the dragon never even laid eyes on them. And yeah, ditching house arrest was a terrible move. Randall said he got it, and Gillen snapped his gaze to the worried kid, asking what was wrong. Randall shook his head, just a guess, but if he was right, they were in for trouble, and the man practically barked, "Then hurry up. Tell me everything." Randall blurted out that once they reached the dragon graveyard, Murren insisted the dragon wasn't strong enough to wake up. Then Galen stared in shock like, "What did we just hear?" He shot back that checking the remains wouldn't be a problem, so they'd run a straight-up investigation and then head back home. The man roared for him to stop, then the truth hit hard. The rebellious dragons weren't born, they were artificially made so someone could command them, and Randall snapped back that couldn't be. He figured it was about Fido and the others, but Jelen shrugged and said it didn't matter. What mattered was that someone was plotting to wake the dragon, and Randall snapped, shocked that if that was true, they could finally use the mechanism. Jelen grinned and agreed that once they got it, they'd be able to study it. Randall said thanks and Jelen slapped him on the back, apologizing for the wait, promising his reward tomorrow, but insisting they should go have fun today, and Randall agreed it was a great idea. He stepped up to the group and one of them snapped, "When did you get this strong? Are you trying to join us?" Then another guy grilled Randall, asking where he'd found a beauty like that. Zelen flashed him a look and promised, "Just wait, someday you'll be the one everyone respects." The next morning they hooked up near the guild, and Murren spilled every last detail she knew. Gilla listened, nodded, and said it all sounded exactly like what he'd already heard yesterday. The man stared the dragon down and demanded, "What are you? A resurrected beast just waking back up?" The monster purred like it owned the world. Giller shrugged, saying it wasn't something to panic over, but for now it's safer to keep it off everyone's radar. Randall gently stroked the dragon and nodded, "Yeah, I think you're right." He snapped back to the memory. During the fight, someone was screaming out in the forest, and he swore it meant more people were caught up in it. Then he pointed out that the dragon must have gone straight for everyone who was there, and Giller just nodded like, "Yeah, it was obvious." "Thanks for the report. He's about to hand out that reward, but first he needs to say one thing," and Randall pushed for answers. "What is it?" Giller told them that Lord Cecil wanted to meet one of them, and Murren lined in, dying to know who he was and what he actually did. Randall shot back and Murren leaned in, baffled. Why would someone this important want to meet them? Gilla figured it out fast. The Lord probably wanted to thank them. Then the man tossed over a bag, snarling that the dragon's remains were a headache for him, since his whole job was keeping the demons off their country, and this was their reward. Randall yanked the bag open and froze. "Gold," he blurted in pure shock. Giller shook his head and shouted, "No, it's rainbows, and that's way bigger than gold." The guy went full panic scream, "You gave us that many." And Giller snapped back that this job was deadly serious, because finishing it mattered to Lord Cecil himself. "Now that I think about it, that reward sounds kinda tiny for a job like that," Randall said. "That's how it is." And Giller shrugged. Either way, let them keep going in the same spirit. Murren and Randall locked eyes, then burst out laughing and shouting, "Of course." Right here in the forest, close to the crumbling remains of the dragon. Lloyd's body jerked up from the ground and he started moving, slow at first, then he heard a noise. He leaned in and breathed out that he was hunting for his own head. Randall slapped the money down and asked his friend what they were even going to do with it all, and when Murren stared back, she said splitting the reward wouldn't be a problem. Randall nodded hard like, "Yeah, that's for sure." Murren told him, "Even if we don't need these right now, we'll need them later." The guy paused, waited, and then shot back, "Yeah, you're right." The guy asked if a moment like that would ever happen, and Randall shot back in shock, "Yeah, absolutely, it's coming." He asked Myron if they could maybe bring her country back, and Myron exploded into a furious scream, shouting that they didn't need to do any of that because everything was already fine. Randall demanded to know why not, maybe she could even meet her parents. The girl admitted she'd love to see them, but she wasn't in a rush. Death wasn't breathing down their neck yet, and they still had a long way to go. Then Myron cut in and asked why he didn't just grab some necromantic equipment. Myron asked if her cloak had some special trick, and Randall snapped back that his cloak boosts his dark magic and can even make him vanish. And until they tracked down something better, the girl urged them to grab whatever they could afford right now. Randall pressed, "So what about her gear?" Murren shot back that she'd have to raid dungeon after dungeon just to hunt down something better than what she had. The boy asked what dungeons even were, and the girl shot back, "Did you really not know about the one God wiped out?" Then Murren leaned in and promised him, if he could push his way to the dungeon's 8th floor, finding the equipment would be the least of his problems. Randall said that's their next target, and the idea didn't sit right with him at all, while the girl insisted they didn't have to rush straight there. "But if you're stepping into that dungeon, you'll need the right gear, and you better grab it right now." Murren shot back that, yeah, aside from his cloak, his outfit was plain as day. Randall blurted, shocked, "You mean you think clothes are just cloth?" And Murren boomed that his weapons and armor weren't ordinary at all. They were packed with magical upgrades, and she even said he was the only guy in the guild who wore a piece of cloth. Myron let out a shaky breath and admitted she was scared he'd need every last piece of gear he could grab. Then she fired off a question, were there any stores nearby where they could stock up? Randall said they should head straight for the city of Iliad, where Fido and his crew always shopped, and that's when the guy turned to Earl and said they'd reached there. The dragon rumbled a happy yes, and the boy and the girl climbed on its back as it launched them toward their destination through the sky. Randall burst out cheering that they were finally on their way. They streaked over the forest and Murren grinned as the ride felt way smoother than she expected. Then the guy flashed that easy smile like, "Yep, you've totally got it." Randall spotted a crowd and shot them a question, straight up, what was happening here. Murren barked that the merchant and his escort were being attacked and they weren't backing down yet. Then the guy snapped his wings open and shot down into the air. Murren demanded what he was doing, and Randall roared that he was coming to help them. With a bright smile, the girl insisted he was the real hero. Then she burst into the sky, wings spread, flying straight after that finger. One of the guys snapped in rage that if this keeps going, Randall needs to know they're okay, so his friend yelled back stunned, "Whoever you are, please help us," and then added, "We're all B rank." Because nobody expected to run straight into the Goblin King here. Randall blurted in shock that they'd actually run into the Goblin King, while the kid already had him pegged as an A rank and B rank didn't even faze him. Randall snapped that was fine. He'd take on the Goblin King so they could keep protecting the merchant, because he couldn't wipe that threat out by himself. Randall grinned as he let his help go, telling everyone not to worry, because he wasn't alone. The guy gasped in disbelief, "It's the Minotaur and Fenrir," and the girl beside him blurted that she never dreamed she'd run into them here, while the other guy exploded, shouting, "Hey, let me handle this Goblin King." Randall broke into a grin and demanded they back off, leaving the Goblin King to him. Then he snapped at Ray and Ace that it was go time. Randall barked Earl's name, then launched himself onto him. People screamed in pure terror. It was a dragon, right in front of them, so the guy shot through the air straight for the Orc King's location. Myron had already hacked the monster's heads clean off, but when the girl said it out loud, it hit like a punch. He'd arrived too late. Randall barreled up to her and bragged that she'd wiped out everyone again, like he had nothing better to do. Murren smirked and said she'd slipped him some sweets. Randall demanded, "What sweets?" Right then, a massive monster stormed in and the guy squealed in pure shock, because it was the Goblin King. Murren told the Goblin King he could hand him an extra skill, and Randall fired back, "I know." Ray Ace heard the guy tell him, "We're free to go, thanks," and right then the merchant's guards came sprinting in. One of them slumped out, exhausted. "We finally caught up." Ray's friend demanded, "What's happening?" And they immediately ducked behind the corners. The Goblin King let out a blood-curdling scream that shook the whole area. The hiding guys shrieked that something was blowing them clean out of their spot. Then one demanded, "Who the heck are you?" Meanwhile, the girl and the guy just stood there, looking way too relaxed for all the chaos. Randall barked at Ray, Aim, and Earl to guard the trio, like their lives depended on it. The monsters encircled the boys, sealing them in so nothing could get close, and one kid blurted out that a Fenrir, a Minotaur, and a dragon were coming, only for his friend to slam back, "No, wait." Then Randall, going full demonologist mode, screamed that he wasn't wrong. He was summoning white flames, and just like that, the enemy crumpled and died. The three guys yelled at the same time, "No way," and Randall bragged that he'd gained the charisma of kings and boosted his growth. Then the other guy confirmed it, said his experience growth speed had skyrocketed, and turned to the group like, "All right, go back." What? One of them said, "Yeah, we're fine." The guy rolled up to them and asked if they were okay, if they weren't hurt. Randall snapped, "I'm good. They just wanted everyone to be all right, that's all." A merchant stormed up to them and burst out that they'd saved his life, then introduced himself as Marin, the chairman of the Midgard Trade Board. Randall jolted in surprise and asked how he knew them, and Marin boomed, "Of course I do." Because merchants were packed with secrets, and right now, the two of them were already famous heroes. Randall stammered that it was all because of his friends, and Marin teased him for being too modest. Then Marin just waved it off and told him, "Go ahead, thank him," as he shoved a rock into his hands. The guy blinked and asked what it was, and Marin grinned and said it was their Chamber of Commerce membership card. Randall blurted out which chamber, and the merchant, Marin, told him, "Sorry, my bad, I'm Marin, I'm with the Midgard Chamber of Commerce," and Randall stared back like he couldn't believe it. Midgard. Marin just said it was a good thing. Randall blared that the Midgard Chamber of Commerce was so massive people swore 60% of the whole country answered to it, and he demanded they'd get a proper thank you later. Until then, he smiled and made it clear he was fine with them, swiping their membership card to pay for everything. Marin beamed and asked if they weren't rushing and if they could just stick with her. Randall nodded, saying it wasn't a bother at all and that Marin would be safe with them. The man erupted in joyful cheers, thanking them over and over because their kindness meant everything to him. The merchant hauled himself into the carriage, promising he'd get seats ready, but Marin shrieked, "It's fine, don't bother." Randall jutted his finger at the dragon and swore they'd be up in the sky, watching it like hawks. Marin promised they'd make sure everyone had what they needed, but Randall snapped, "What about all the injured people?" The merchant just shrugged, no need to worry, and bragged that they only distributed top-tier potions. Randall swore it was the truth, while everyone who couldn't move was somehow sprinting around, laughing like nothing could stop them. A guy stepped right up and said, "You've got to be Randall." Then he gave them a huge nod, "Thanks for everything this time," and introduced himself as Alan, the leader of this whole united crew. Randall pumped his hand, grinned, and said, "Yeah, it was great meeting you." Alan jerked a finger at the three guys and thanked them for watching over a member of their group in the woods. Then one of them shrugged and said, "If they're cool with it, we'll come with you." Randall shot up in shock and blurted, "Wait, what? You want us to lead our joint group?" The boy howled no please, like it was the end, because he wasn't a leader at all. Murren shot back, "So why didn't we try?" Randall erupted in a scream. He couldn't do that, and Murren was way more suited than he was, while the girl shrieked back, "I know you can't, because you've never had a single subordinate." They started bickering at full volume, and everyone nearby stared like they'd walked into a mess. Randall snapped out of the chaos, insisted they'd take the lead, and made it clear he was the leader. Murren stood right there, visibly offended, while Randall bowed and introduced himself with a smooth, "Nice to meet you." The crowd erupted. Randall, the mighty S-rank hero who'd simply had enough, who walked off to live his own way, but yeah, he was still tangled up in the whole saint mess. Randall flailed his arms, thinking, "Great, I'm not denying it, am I?" Crowds kept yelling, "Wait, why is Myron standing right beside him?" And right then, she was suddenly handed a B rank. People couldn't believe it. She was gorgeous and powerful, and the rumor was even wilder. They said she was stronger than Randall. Myron's patience snapped. She cackled like a villain and swore she'd fix this right now as she commanded the savannah. The bats lifted every single person into the air, and the whole crowd erupted in shocked screams like, "No way, it can't be." What? They stared at their own hands, gasped in disbelief as the wounds started closing up, and then, right before their eyes, the left eye he'd lost 5 years ago began to heal too. "That old wound on my leg is finally closing up too, like some kind of miracle just decided to hit me." Alan promised one more time that these two are legendary adventurers, acting like two people, but moving with the same fire as an S-class team, then admitted he's A-rank himself and still can't touch how strong they are. Until now, he'd been their leader, but then he dropped the reins and handed them over to the far more qualified Randall. Alan stepped up to everyone and demanded, "What's your problem? What's stopping you?" People snapped their heads around, shouting at the top of their lungs, "No way, we're not against it." Randall leaned in and grilled the guy, asking if he was really sure about what he was saying. Alan grinned and said, "Yeah, sure, our united group leader only needs raw strength. Don't overthink it, it's fine." Randall just shrugged and said, "Yeah, it's all good." Randall dropped onto a log and started chatting with his new buddies. Then food landed in front of him, and he awkwardly blurted, "Are you sure this doesn't look crazy expensive?" Marin grinned and said it was the least they could do, since they basically saved his life, and Alan added that they'd truly helped them more than they could ever repay. He told his friends he was sorry he couldn't make it, and he meant it. Then one of the guys grinned and asked if they were alive, weren't they? His friend yelled back that was all that mattered. The guy turned to Randall and said he bet they could have handled his power way more easily right there. Randall demanded what he meant by that, and the boy shot back that he was talking about the ghost forest. Randall figured it was a place the guild banned low-ranking adventurers from even stepping into, so he pressed harder. The boy then fired back, "What happened there?" And Alan admitted, voice dropping, that he got lost in the ghost forest. Randall blurted, all pumped, "Hey, why are you acting so lost?" Alan leaned in and told him the truth. A tiny demon had saved his life. If his parents hadn't welcomed him in, he'd never be sitting here today. Randall even called it a hilarious tale, but let's be real. Landing a rank in this group is still a huge, prestigious deal. They came to help, so they kept rolling with the same heart. Then he glanced at Myron, stuffing herself happily like nothing could stop her. The girl hacked out a cough and screamed that she was actually listening to him. Randall just waved it off, saying, "It's okay, don't you rush." Night dropped like a curtain and everyone crashed into sleep. Randall lay in the tent beside the girl while the guy grilled him on what he'd done, Myron leaning in, eyes bright, begging for the meaning, until Randall snapped back that he never saw himself as a leader, not like that especially. He's the one who builds the teams and runs the whole operation, while Earl keeps watch as the lookout, and he even said that once he started paying attention, the small stuff like weird noises and animal movements suddenly mattered, giving him a seriously valuable experience. Murren grinned and said she was sure he'd picked up these skills long ago. Now they were just finally paying off. Randall stared at her stunned, then it hit him. She was right, and when he looked back, he realized just how much he'd truly been through. Randall admitted, "Yeah, I think that might be it." The boy started to realize Ray, Ace, Errol, and Myron were getting stronger nonstop, and he kept remembering all the wild new people he'd met. It hit him. This was the moment to live it up with his friends, but even with the fun, he knew there was still a ton of work waiting around the corner. Randall blared, "We have to try," and slammed the point home like it was the only way forward. The city of Aliad, where every street feels like a loaded secret and trouble, could explode any second. Midgard Company. Arndal and Myron sat across from the merchant, and Myron leaned in like, "You don't even know how much you've helped us. Seriously, you were a huge deal." Randall didn't know what to say, so he awkwardly blurted that they were just passing by. Myron snapped that if he was tangled up like this, he probably didn't have that kind of luck, while Randall shrugged and said he didn't look lucky at all. The man demanded their plans for the next few days, and Randall shot back that they meant to stock up on supplies, while the mirror practically sang, "Yeah, that's it." Marin offered to pay them for what they'd done, and the man even promised a full set of equipment. Randall blurted in shock, "You'll really give us everything?" But Marin cut in fast, telling him they should not refuse the gift. Those two are basically household names, so if they'd plug his product, it'd do him a serious boost. Randall insisted this was pure honesty, and Marin snapped back that trust is everything when it comes to doing business. He shot back that they weren't handing over his gear for free, and then he smirked like, "We've got cash to buy those kits ourselves." Randall slammed a bag of gold onto the table, and Morin nearly choked from surprise, because even S-rank adventurers would call that amount of coins an insane fortune. "So that's why," he muttered, meaning Randall would chase the best master he could find, and when the question finally landed, he demanded what he'd heard about their arsenal. He swore adventurers deserved real gear, and that's why he pushed the Midgard series, mass-produced armor with tight uniform standards that still costs a fair price, and suddenly the Midgard Chamber of Commerce hit the spotlight. Marin nodded and said, "Yeah, that makes sense, because their trading company mostly moves standardized goods, but they also carry one-of-a-kind works," and then Randall leaned in and asked, "So what kind?" He shot back, "Yep, magic powers the mass production, but the originals, those are hand-built by master craftsmen." Marin said he'd get their craftsmen to make gear for them personally, and Randall burst out in happy disbelief. Like, this is an incredible honor, because the creator behind the Midgard series would be working right for them. Marin just smiled and told him not to stress about the money. They only had to expect top-tier quality. Randall blurted out, "So what do we do now?" The guy shot a look at Marin, who was already scarfing down sweets, and he hesitated, then awkwardly asked, "What's good?" Marin grinned and cheered, "It's really tasty." Randall demanded to know if she'd been listening to their conversation at all, and the girl snapped back in pure anger, "Of course I was." Marin told her, "Since you love sweets that much, you've got to grab some for later," and the girl beamed as she shouted, "Thank you," back, while Randall just muttered, "You're way too kind." The boy asked if a human craftsman could really make solid gear for a dungeon, and Marin nodded. Yeah, humans still aren't on par with the other races, but he swore his buddy, the craftsman, could pull it off. After all, divine weapons get forged by supernatural beings. And then he claimed the divine weapons weren't just weapons at all. They were golems, with battle power that blows a dragon out of the sky, plus sacred artifacts packed with protective magic strong enough to shield an entire country. And Randall finished it by saying masters who can craft that level of power are worth their weight in gold. Marin shot back that they did, and those creatures somehow fused the High Elves' endless lifespan with the Dwarves' natural one. Randall swore he'd seen proof the High Elves were gone for good. Marin said it meant they were the minority race, just like him. If they hadn't been combat-ready and stuck to the shadows, the merchants would have spotted them already, and it wouldn't have ended well. The hero was convinced they had special abilities of their own, but deep down, they knew it wouldn't be enough to shield them, just like Muram's people. Marin cut him off and snapped, "Yeah, you protect them, but instead of saving humans, you build weapons." Then she added that he even has a special reward waiting for the craftsmen. "Some folks are just truly selfless," she insisted. "They only need materials, so he lets them hammer away for a decent wage." The man insisted they shouldn't jump to bad conclusions. He swore they'd never been enslaved. Randall lit up and promised he'd hand over the budget to cover every expense, but Marin shook her head and said, "Nope, it's more than enough already." What? He never dragged things out. At first, he thought the two of them were just a tamer and a mage, but Randall shut it down fast. He said he's currently listed as a necromancer. The guy called a wolf into existence, and Randall snapped back in shock. Sure, it wasn't some harmless tamed pet, it was a summoner, plain and simple. Randall shot back that the room was so huge he could only pull out one Fenrir, but right beside it, a minotaur and a dragon were also in the mix. Marin demanded they show him no hate, no hostility, and that's just how necromancy works. Randall admitted pretty bluntly, "Honestly, I don't know." But the guy insisted like it was gospel. Necromancers command death itself. No wonder he takes that like it's nothing at all. Then the man finally clocked what had just happened to the guy he was talking to. They don't hate him or glare at him one bit, and he starts to wonder if this is just another nasty trick of necromancy. Then the hero shrugs and admits, straight up, he honestly has no idea. Myron boasts that if she wants, she can force anyone to obey, even if it means crushing them or killing them without mercy, but he refuses to use it, insisting she's only holding back because he's a good person, until the hero shuts that down and snaps back, no, that's not the truth. What? The girl shoots back, that's exactly how it is, and that's why the girls who like him won't let go. The man nods like, yeah, that totally makes sense. Randall demanded he be allowed to forge even more gear for the Fenrir, the Minotaur, and the dragon. Then Murren chimed in, claiming she wanted her own gear too, but it had to be tailored with a dark magic specialty. Murren shot back, of course, I'll make sure you've got everything, and then teased, maybe we'll do something else too. Murren shot back a question about the demon and vampire hunters. If anyone was going to target them, could they tell them right away? Then Murren just said, sure. Meering forged the bat and handed it over with a grin. Now let me see you work with this beauty. And if anything goes sideways, she'll ring the alarm and they'll sprint in to help. Myron leaned in and told her friend, every traitor is just an informant, don't worry, it won't weigh on you. And when Randall agreed, Myron flashed a confident smile and said, got it, I'll make sure I tell them. The man shot to his feet and told them he truly appreciated their precious story, like it meant everything to him. Then he handed the girl a box of sweets as a sweet little thank you. Murren let out a joyful cry, practically buzzing that it was the best thing she'd ever tasted. Then she declared they'd head downstairs and hunt down everything they needed for their adventures, because she couldn't wait to serve them with a smile. Morin said he had an appointment and had to step out, leaving them there, and Randall nodded back, yep, thanks for everything. He leaned in and asked Murren what they should stock in their inventory, and she blurted, of course. They walked into the store and Randall immediately blurted, does it feel like everyone's staring at us? Murren just grinned and said, yeah, but not at you, they're watching me, and no, I'm not here for you, I'm fine. They spotted a man screaming at the sellers. He snapped, demanding when they started letting in ragamuffins like them, because this place is supposed to be for the chosen only. The seller snapped back, yeah, it's true, his name is Glim and he's a baron. He jabbed a finger at the heroes and demanded to know what the porters for the fallen candidates were doing in a place like this. Murren bragged that he was some big-name celebrity. Randall shot back that it wasn't helping at all. Glim snapped that Murren was just playing the victim, but the truth hit hard. The whole mess was coming from him. He slid up to Myron and bragged, with a man like him, even the prettiest beauty fades, so let her come to me. I won't lay a finger on her, and I'll buy her everything her heart desires. And when night falls, she'll make sure to thank him, big time. Murren barked in pure rage, saying that in their day, even pigs could talk. Glim swung at her, but she slipped out of the way at the last second. Even kids know you don't scream in public, so tell me, did he really think he could act like that in there? He barked that if she was submissive, he'd keep being nice. They were puny adventurers, no chance against his raw power, so Murren sneered, daring him to prove it. Murren stormed up to them and demanded the Baron explain what the heck was going on. Gleam flashed a smile, but even then he couldn't bring himself to welcome strangers and unknown adventurers into that place. He insisted he'd only warned them and told everyone not to worry. Then Maren snapped, furious, asking how he could have possibly laughed at these people, his saviors. The man boomed that this team was S-rank, like the young master, the very A-rank hero, right down to the fact they'd teamed up and wiped out a dragon, and that he'd even personally witnessed them crush the Goblin King that ambushed his crew, saving his life. Then Maron chimed in that they totally deserved to shop at the store. Glenn stammered that even if they were tough, he was a big customer and these were important deals. Then Marin cut in mid-sentence and demanded to know what he was trying to say. He fired back that nobody needed to rank him against anyone. He'd keep being a solid trading partner, not just someone who'd saved a life once. Then Marin shook his head and said there was nothing that could be done. Then they'd have to throw cooperation out the window and smash every promise. Glim demanded, what did you just say? And Marin answered that between the S-rank adventurers who saved his life, the ones everyone swore would have a huge future, and the current him. Don't even bother comparing them. He spun around to the employee who'd rounded up people to take Glim out. He shot off the accusation through clenched teeth, basically daring himself to believe he could slip away with it. He's got Lord Cecilium in his back pocket. Marin snapped that people didn't have to be so rude to traders. Yeah, they chased profit, but they still stuck to their own rules, and anyone who pushed back like him wasn't their customer. Gleam burst out of the store screaming, and Marin rushed to tell Randall she was sorry, only for him to awkwardly wave it off and insist none of this was his fault, so she didn't have to worry. Then they stepped outside and took a walk through the city together. The man scrambled to apologize again, but Randall cut in, saying they'd actually done a great job shopping. Then Murren shrugged that this sort of mess had happened before, so he wasn't worried at all. The merchant thrust sweets into their hands, and the girl leaned in, eyes sparkling. What were they? He grinned and said the hottest treat in the capital was a caramel apple, and the moment she took a bite, pure joy lit up her face. She snatched up a mountain of treats. Randall admitted she'd been way too on guard lately, and the girl's cheeks flared as she snapped, "It's all your fault." Murren bolted to the other shops. Randall grinned to himself, fully convinced, yeah, this was the real good stuff. Right then, Randall's old crew rolled up to Morrel's house to kick their plan into full action. A squad of ex-S-ranks rolled up to Morrel, and the second he saw them, he realized it had been ages since they'd crossed paths. The girl in the hat instantly clocked the voice and recognized who it was. Morrel spun around in a flash and strode straight to the door where the adventurers stood, smiling wide as she promised she'd finally pay back the debt she owed Mail. Morrel glanced at the crowd standing nearby and instantly figured they were the hero candidates, but the girl just let out a chuckle, saying that the Gill Bleeder, based on everything she'd seen, was nothing but a fool if he really believed that. Mail suddenly yanked out a wand, flicked levitation into the air, and dropped it right over Logue's head, calling it the head of Dulenhin, leaving Quella stunned, while Myril reached out and touched her gift. Quella was so stunned she burst into screams, snapping back at Morrel, the group's priest. He insisted that the head was tied to one of their own, Lloyd's Aff. Morel's words were enough to make Quella stop cold, but Quella didn't choke herself. She grabbed the girl's throat, and the air started running out fast. Fidos erupted, screaming the saint's name as Quella fought to speak through the strain, clutching at her throat, and the leader snapped at Merle to stop. Quella coughed and snapped back to herself, then erupted in screams that it couldn't be the Doulahan's head, while the girl hissed that Mistress Mail should have buried Lloyd's body. Merle kept a grip on her head and stared her down, then snapped that it was all a lie. Right then, Fido and Quella whipped their eyes to Mail, demanding answers, and they wanted the truth, not silence. Mail admitted she'd only show the knight the girl's Lloyd's head, cloaking her own face with magic, because she feared the knights would seize and tie her up, and even then, she knew they couldn't keep the secret hidden forever. Then the group's mage whipped her head around and said, "That person can reach the knights." She was talking straight to the Sorcerers Association's head, Immortal Myril, the one who once was the Skrull known as the Vampire Hunter, and when Myril smiled, she basically said, "Mail gets it all instantly, just like I'd expect." Mail tried to promise payment in return, but Morrel cut her off before the words even left her mouth. "I get it all." Then the association's boss nodded and declared the deal was already sealed, swearing she'd shut down the Knightly Order and the Low Agi. Fathu yanked out his shout from the back, demanding answers, and when Myril spun around, she labeled him a small hero candidate, then hit him with the truth. He wasn't just weak, he was downright stupid. Fido's fury skyrocketed, but the boy shut his mouth because he finally clocked it. Morel was on a whole different level. Then the head of the association spun to Mail and demanded to know if he was a Doulahan, tapping her head like it was the answer. Mail shook her head and admitted, "I don't know." Myril leaned in and inspected the head so closely, and when she finally pointed it out, she basically said, "Look again, there's no special treatment here, no signs of rot either, and that's what makes this way more interesting." After that, Mail leaned in and said, "We only have one gift ready." Morrel didn't even blink, she just told the girl to boot those stupid adventurers out and bring her back. Mail stared at the floor for a beat, then snapped his gaze up to Morrel's eyes and told her she'd handle this her own way. Morrel burst into laughter, daring the girl to do exactly what she wanted. Myril turned to the whole crew and barked, "First things first, you can't get captured, and if you need anything to prep that second gift, come find me." Myril spun around and warned him about one tricky detail in the prep, and the girl shot back that they'd never be able to beat monsters or vampires, yet that answer hooked Myril instantly. She flashed a huge smile and pressed a hand to her chin, and Morel swore that from every clue, Mail was cooking up something wild, truly exceptional. Myril didn't want to drag the suspense any longer. She spun around and blurted it out, "A vampire and a former tamer." And honestly, she couldn't wrap her head around it either. How do you even have a former class? Mail bragged that he was nothing like a vampire, and maybe even stronger than one too. Fathu snapped, calling it pure nonsense, but the mage girl cut in fast and shut him down. Mail snapped that Randall was a full-blown monster now, and she flat out knew they couldn't take him and the vampire down if they fought the same way they used to. Fido gaped at Mail, stunned. How is this even possible? Then the curse flew out of him and Mail finished it off. That's exactly why she turned Loeg into this. Mail explained that she jammed so much poison into him that he'd turn into a monster, way beyond any normal human on the continent. Myril flashed a smile, then the woman held out her hand and promised that if Mail would let her study one of them, she'd shut down every attempt to wipe out their group. After that, Morel declared, "If you can bring back even one of the guys we told you about, alive, then I'll instantly turn your whole crew into a team of heroes. Quelli fido erano pietrificate, incapacity di credere sia il capo del sociazione dei Magi aveva appena rivelato. Fido fisan passo avanti, fisandola, illici fos davvero vero. Murrow let out a chuckle and leaned in close to Fathu, saying the kid couldn't even swallow his own claims about the hero. Then Fathu suddenly went dead still. The boy's face went pale and he scrambled for an excuse, but Myrtle cut him off, saying they didn't need to hide because that woman's power could already swallow them all. Then Mail shot back that Myrtle could handle it. Father couldn't shut his mind off, thoughts kept racing like a storm. Fired up on the belief that Morel's power could make him a true hero, the leader barked that they were going to pull it off. Koala looked at Randall like he'd lost his mind, blaming that vampire for the madness, and she couldn't even picture how they were supposed to catch the thing alive. Myrtle stared at Mail's team, laughing at one second and recoiling the next, then snapped to the magician that her friends, judging by what she'd seen, had absolutely lost their minds. Meanwhile, Randall and Murren came flying straight for Lord Sicilium's mansion, because he'd already demanded their presence, and they touched down here riding a dragon. Suddenly a sword blade hovered behind them, so close and so unexpected that even the Lord's guests froze, and a sharp voice demanded to know who the couple was and why they'd come. Clad in full armor, the knight gripped his rapier and aimed it at the unknown, then demanded answers, shouting that they'd fallen from the sky and pressing on to uncover the real reason for the visit and who they truly were. Randall shot his hands up like, "Wait, good intentions," and the man immediately introduced himself as Randall, an adventurer, claiming they were only here because the Lord himself invited them, not because he was some sketchy nobody. The knight snapped out of it, blurted out an apology, and bowed so hard when he realized exactly who stood before him. Then he promised he'd warn his lord at once, and just a few minutes later, he and the others were already seated inside the mansion at the reception. Sicilium, the ruler of the entire region, looked shockingly young, and the lord thanked his guests before dropping, "Welcome." Randolph froze for a second, then blurted that this was the first time they'd ever met face to face, only for the lord to burst into laughter, waving off the formalities like they didn't matter, because they were his guests who just spared the region a whole mountain of trouble. Randall pivoted to the Lord and snapped that it wasn't worth praising them, and Sicilium shot back at once, begging him not to speak to Randall so respectfully. Then the Lord grinned and declared, "To me, they're heroes," saying he'd be happy if the guests carried on with him like a friend, before adding that their voices and words between them came out completely differently. Randall smiled and nodded, he got it, and then the Lord himself stepped forward, apologized for summoning them, and said it was all for a reason before throwing down his first words of thanks, for bringing the dragon under control. Randall snapped that they were thrilled to serve, and the Lord leaned in like, "So you're happy?" Because the guild was about to pay him big for this order. Randall nodded hard and said, "Yes, and that's more than enough." The Lord burst into laughter, claiming everything was fine and dandy, but then he shrugged it off, saying it wasn't enough. With a huge grin stretched across his face, the Lord leaned in and asked Randall if he had any dreams, because he was ready to make them real, no matter what. Sicilium swore he'd do anything, even chasing a title or a mansion. Then after a quick pause, he casually slipped in that his daughter was still too young to be involved, and Randall, not even waiting for the rest, almost choked on the tea halfway down. The Lord said this wasn't the main topic, but he still pushed the conversation anyway. Sicilium wants her daughter to end up with a man like Randall, because that would make him happy, except his daughter is only 7 years old. Randall wiped his mouth after tea and knew he had to switch the topic, because the guy flat out said he wasn't even close to being the right match for a girl with a status that high. Then the guy shot his hands up in shock, switched gears, and blurted out the whole question. Could the Lord really hand him a title? The Lord smiled and said, "Sure, I'll make you a Viscount, no problem." Randall went pale at that claim. Viscount wasn't just important, it was one of the biggest, top-tier titles you could hold in any government role. Miriam lit up, telling Randall it was totally awesome, and Randall hesitated like, "Don't just nod that fast." Then Lord chuckled and said he'd let the decision ride with the guy. Then the Lord demanded answers about the mansion. Randall spread the map out, jabbed a finger at the spot, and the man blurted that it was way out of reach, but Randall's got the kind of power that'll have him there in a blink. Then the Lord leaned in and said this land used to belong to his own family, with old mansions still standing there, and not a single soul living inside. Lord Sicilium flashed a grin and said he wouldn't let the houses sit empty. It'd spark resentment, for real, and Randall had to admit, the idea was dangerously tempting. Randall mulled it over and realized Earl's mansion would be the perfect play. Getting there would be a breeze, and there's no way the guy would ever dismiss a personal mansion as a bad deal. After Randall admitted something had him totally stumped, Lord flashed a smile and said, "That's exactly what you should expect from an S-ranked team, because they don't rush, they stay cautious." The Lord told them they could finally have a no-nonsense talk, straight to the point, and then, with a sketchy little drawing voice, he insisted this definitely wasn't a dragon graveyard, but said there was a catch. The man dropped his voice and warned them that the undead sometimes slipped into that area, and Randall and Murren just kept staring at the Lord, silent as stone. Randall yanked his own head back like he'd just cracked the whole code, swearing he understood everything, while Murren stared in shock, realizing the Lord's lands were crawling with evil spirits. The Lord, trying to sound steady, admitted the girl was painfully perceptive. Cecilium insisted he didn't mean undead at all, then instantly corrected himself, only low-ranking zombies and skeletons, and for that tiny cleanup and expulsion, the Lord would hand him a mansion. The Lord took one look at that offer and gave an immediate thumbs up, and right on the spot he said so. Then Murren spun to the necromancer and demanded what he'd say to a request like that. Randall paused, then said in this scratchy, drawing kind of voice that a necromancer wouldn't find the task all that hard. Then the guy leaned in and swore he was down for the adventure. The Lord lit up, threw his arms wide, and promised, "There are magical items in this mansion too. Use them and you can reach me anytime," then demanded they report every success. Murren blurted that this had to be the original goal, and the girl stared at Randall like, "Look at the evidence. This guy is totally head over heels for that aristocrat." Randall studied the girl with sharp suspicion, and Myron shot back fast. Basically, the Lord wanted to recruit them. Titles, a daughter, a mansion, all of it just to make them work for him. Cecilium burst into laughter, then grinned and told her she'd nailed it, every single thing, and now he was putting his trust in Mr. Randall and Mistress Murren. Randall was thrilled by the honor, and the Lord, eyes blazing with curiosity, pressed the boy to see if he could prove his strength right there. Randall blinked in surprise, then the hall door swung open at once. The Lord said he couldn't wait to meet her, but before that, he had to introduce someone first. A girl burst into the hall, snapped a sharp salute to the Lord, and wasted no time. She introduced herself as Ayla of the Second Knightly Order of the Cecilium family, then said she'd come just like the Lord asked. The Lord jabbed a finger at the girl and told his guests that Ayla, an elite fighter and one who's fiercely proud of the knightly orders he gives. Then the Lord whipped his finger the other way and was already calling Ayla over, while Cecilium stepped in and introduced her to Mr. Randall and Mrs. Myron, people he'd mentioned to her earlier. She clutched her helmet in both hands and blurted out, "This is our first time seeing each other." Then she snapped into a deep bow, repeated her name like it mattered, and smiled as she said she was thrilled to meet them. Randall clocked the girl staring him down like he was the main event, and it instantly made him feel awkward. He scratched his head and, with a shaky bit of confidence, admitted he was really happy to be there. Lord Cecilium threw his hands wide and told Randall he'd love for him to train with the knights for a while. Then he leaned back, stared up, and started plotting his reward. The Lord definitely had something valuable to say, and when the man promised that he could reward the boys with good wine and sweets, Murren lit up like he'd been waiting for that exact treat. Myron's expression snapped instantly, and as she clenched her fist, she screamed that they were ready. Then Randall swallowed his doubts, felt her touch, and answered, "Yeah, it's time." Murren demanded what sweets he meant, and the man said the girl loved cookies, so he'd ask her to whip up the best batch. Randall's eyes lit up like, if sweets are on the table, Murren's not getting stopped, and the Lord got the message. To throw them off, all he had to do was snag Murren's attention. The Margrave's real motives were still a mystery, but Randall's guard started to slip. He broke into a smile and promised himself he'd stay calm.